Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Where did you get this? The deputy sheriff asked us as the four of us boys gathered around the desk in his interview room. He studied the picture incredulously with a profound look of recognition on his face that he was unable to disguise. I told you. I drew it, I said. It was the girl we saw in the woods when we were camping. She was acting kind of strange, sir, and then she vanished like a ghost. My dad said we should tell you about it, that we should come and show you the picture, in case she's registered as missing. You see, we saw her at night in such a random, isolated spot, sir. It's very remote, so seeing her was more than a little odd. My dad agrees about this. I see, said the deputy sheriff. Did you all witness this anomalous girl by any chance? Yes, sir, came the response from me and my three best friends, together in a joyous crescendo. We all saw her, sir, but something wasn't right about her. How so? Asked the sheriff, raising a quizzical brow. I don't know, sir, said my friend Kirk, leaping to answer the question like a horse bounding across the jumps at a show with a fervent enthusiasm that he was unable to conceal, try as he might. To make no bones about it, we were all exceedingly excited to be at the sheriff's office, as after all, it wasn't every day of the week we got this perfect opportunity of talking to the sheriff's deputy, and possibly even the sheriff himself if we were lucky, that was. It was better than playing cops and robbers any day of the week, for this was the real deal. It didn't get better than this. It was the way she was running. She seemed to almost float, I said, while the sheriff deputy looked rather nonplussed by my absurd description of the girl, so much so that I instantly regretted having mentioned it at all. But it was true. The young girl looked like she was floating. The deputy sheriff was trying to fight the twitches on the corner of his mouth from loosening their grip like a tight elastic band, developing into a huge amused smile. He wrote down my comments on his notepad, feigning a serious expression on his face. I could see the curly twirl of his left-handed scroll, writing, "Girl seemed to float in witness's opinion." At that moment the sheriff entered the room. I felt giddy with excitement, like the time my father brought me a little Labrador puppy as a surprise gift. I had jumped up and down like an excitable Jack Russell. I'd never been more thrilled a day in my life. These salient, high-ranking men, attired in their smart uniforms, shining badges, and large cowboy hats, were like the quintessential illustrious American heroes to me, and I was in awe of them. Better still, they were giving us the time of day, hanging on to our every word. It made me feel desperately important, so very grown up. The deputy sheriff dragged his chair backwards, rose to his feet, walking over to the sheriff with my picture in his hands, which he showed to the sheriff. They were talking in low, hushed tones, while the sheriff kept glancing in our direction, with an expression on his face that seemed to linger from bewilderment to curiosity, with a little confusion thrown into the mix, like the mishmash of spices in a Christmas cake. I could see the sheriff's normally olive complexion taking on a very distinctive pink hue, as his wide eyes gawked at my picture. "It looks exactly like her. The resemblance is spot on. Where did they see her?" he asked the deputy in a low tone, which I overheard. "I'm not sure," said the deputy sheriff, shrugging his shoulders in a nonchalant way. "I've questioned them fully on all these specific details, but we're making progress slowly and surely. But something is very off about their descriptions of the girl. Seriously off. Leave it to me, Barton. I'll finish off what you started. Could you get me the files, please, concerning the case and, the photographs of the missing girl in question? Righto, Sheriff. Coming up." The sheriff ambled over to the desk where we were seated in this formal gathering. He lifted up his cowboy hat briefly from his head in a warm, congenial greeting with a twinkle in his hazel eyes. "Hey, y'all," he said in a southern drawl as he pulled out a chair from the desk and sat down. My heart was beating excitedly. The smile inside me was so large it could have reached from Washington State to Colorado in a second. I felt as if I would burst with pride as the sheriff was about to examine my picture with such conviction and certitude. I couldn't help thinking how commanding he looked as he sat down awkwardly at the table, stroking his dark brown moustache in his hands reflectively, while he studied the picture much more closely, examining every last detail of my drawing with a thoroughness that was so impressive. "Who drew this?" he asked. "I did," I said. "Very impressive picture, if I may say so. You should become a police artist one day. Your drawing is very realistic. The sheriff's office is always looking for a fine talent like yours. You saw this girl?" he said, referring to my picture. "May I ask you, where exactly did you see her? It's very important." "Last night, when we were camping. She was acting very weird. She wasn't wearing shoes, which is weirder still. You see, your feet can get really cut up running around the place like that, but she didn't seem bothered by it at all." The sheriff's brow furrowed, crinkling in long vertical ridges. "You're very right, young man. Running around in bare feet is very strange, peculiar behaviour. Where did you say you spotted the young girl?" "Well, my parents booked a cabin near the Cascades National Park. I'm sure you know where that is, sir. Well, we were staying there. I've actually got the address for you," I said, reaching in my pocket to pull out a crumpled piece of paper, resembling an old receipt from the supermarket, which I swiftly ironed out with my hands to straighten it, handing it back to the sheriff. "My dad said you might want it. The address, I mean, sir. Just so you know, I invited my 3 best friends here with me on the trip, sir. We decided to camp out in the woods, a short distance from the cabin where my parents were staying. They didn't want us to camp too far away from them. They like to keep an eye on us, you see, sir." The sheriff snatched the address from me, glancing at it curiously. "Oh, I know where this is," he said, sounding oddly satisfied. "This girl you say you saw, was she actually wearing a white dress, a cotton summer dress?" "The very same, sir," I said. "Well, that's what I've drawn in the picture there." "Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Was her dress soiled by any chance? Torn even? Were there any bloodstains on her dress that you could see?" "No, sir. It was perfectly white, pristine even. It was actually shining like the moon." What was wrong with me, I thought, secretly chastising myself for my nonsensical descriptions. It would hardly be a surprise if the sheriff doubted my report. Saying that her dress looked like the moon was rather over the top, too over the top to even begin to digest. But then I wasn't exaggerating in the least. It was actually true. I was ever grateful that I had 3 other witnesses to verify my strange sighting. "Very white, sir," said Keith, leaping to my defence, bolting into the conversation like an exuberant dog that was tired of not getting all the attention centred upon him. "Now," said the sheriff, "how did you chance upon the young girl, may I ask?" "Well, we were in our tent, sir, talking in our sleeping bags, telling scary ghost stories, when we heard something like acorns being pelted against our tent. It gave us a big fright, sir. We thought there might be a Bigfoot out there. We were quite literally trembling in our boots, sir." "I see," said the sheriff, clearing his throat. As if the idea of a Bigfoot roaming around a camping site bordered on an imagination going far beyond the realms of the comprehensible. The sheriff, much like his deputy, seemed to be fighting back a smile. He even coughed, as if to muffle an amused laugh. "So you stealthily sneaked out of your tent to see what was going on. Am I right?" "Yip," I said, biting my lip awkwardly. I hardly wanted to tell the sheriff that we were all complete wusses. We were so terrified we were intent on hightailing it back to my parents' cabin as quickly as we possibly could. I was not going to reveal that to him. Not a chance. That would make us look feeble, pathetic even. I wanted the sheriff to be really impressed with our innate powers of observation, our shrewd discernment, our extraordinary courage. I could envisage him saying in the years to come that we were quite simply the most ballsy young men he had ever had the pleasure to meet. The way the sheriff was listening to us, his attention so focused on our every word, made me swell with pride. I gloated as I told him our story, with about as much pleasure as a hippo wallowing in a rock pool in Africa, lavishing in every single second of that gloriously sunny bath. "So what happened next?" asked the sheriff, removing his cowboy hat from his head, placing it beside him on the desk, while his finger twiddled and traced the outer brim, as if stroking it lovingly, like a much-beloved cat. "Well, we saw her, sir. That was when we saw her." "What was she doing?" asked the sheriff. "The young girl, I mean." "She was indicating for us to follow her, sir," said Keith, bursting into the conversation hurriedly, with his usual annoying fervour, which made me more than a little peeved. Had he not forgotten what we had agreed, that I was the one that would do all the talking? Yet he'd wantonly forgotten all about that. Was so determined to be in the spotlight. How irritating he was. At that the sheriff looked surprised. "She was indicating for you to follow her?" "That's right, sir." "And you did, I assume?" "Of course, sir. We all followed her. She led us to the lake, looked at it, pointed to the lake, and then simply vanished." "She vanished?" said the sheriff, repeating the words as if trying to decipher exactly what they meant. "Well, yes, sir. She was there one minute, gone the next. We didn't know where she went. It happened so fast. Maybe she was hiding from us, sir. Acting all silly, you know." At that moment the deputy sheriff entered the interview room, handing a brown envelope to the sheriff. The sheriff opened it with his large hand, pulling out a photograph. "Is this the young girl you saw?" he asked us. "That's her!" I said in a spirit of vivacity. "That's her! That's the girl we saw!" My three friends chorused in agreement, like the backup singers in a concert. "Yes, sir, that's definitely her." "This is a missing persons case of about 3 months ago. The girl vanished from her home in Washington State. No one knew what happened. She had a turbulent relationship with her stepfather, a little on the feisty side, I gather, always getting into impudent little spats over mindless things. The girl's mother believed they weren't serious squabbles, but it appears she ran away from home. Some believe that the stepfather was responsible for her disappearance, but to date the investigation has reached a gridlock." "But we saw her, sir, in the woods, so he can't have harmed her. She seemed pretty fine to me." The sheriff cleared his throat, as if fighting some inward struggle of what to say next, and whatever it wasn't flowing fluidly from his tongue, almost as if he had a huge frog trapped in the back of his throat. "Do you think you might have seen a ghost? The girl, I mean. The girl's ghost." At that revelation, all 4 of us boys looked gobsmacked, as the colour completely drained from our faces. Our eyes grew wide as saucers. It was like the detective had poured a bucket of cold water over our heads. We were recovering from the stinging electric shock of the aftermath. Indeed, his daunting words were so astonishing, so outlandish, so preposterous, that for a moment we mulled over them in our heads, while the sheriff's office had become so quiet that you could have heard a pin drop. Why would you even say that, sir?" I stammered uncertainly. She didn't look like a ghost." "What does a ghost even look like?" said the sheriff. "There are no hard and fast rules about that, surely. You must admit, some of the descriptions you've given me don't make any sense. They sound so farcical. But I know that you 4 boys unequivocally saw what you claim to have seen. I do not doubt your credibility for a single second. I always instinctively discern the truth, and you boys are very credible." The sheriff reviewed his notes and read out aloud to us. "The girl was running barefoot across the wooded terrain with effortless ease." And then from the deputy sheriff's notes here, you describe her as being strange, idiosyncratic, something not quite right about her. She seemed to float in her white dress that you saw, which appears not to have been weathered or soiled in 3 entire months, and furthermore it shone like the moon. Now, that is quite remarkable. Who has a dress that shines like the moon, I ask you? Or hangs around in a dress for 3 months without getting it dirty or soiled? Now that's the kind of dress every woman would want to buy." You think we saw a ghost, sir?" I asked, looking stunned. But she didn't look like one. I admit she did vaporize or disappear, if you like, but she didn't look like a ghost." "Did not look like a ghost," said the sheriff, completing my sentence, rolling the words around on his tongue like a foreign food he wasn't sure he wanted to actually digest. "You say she was pointing at the lake very deliberately?" "That's right, sir. Now I come to think of it, she seemed irresolute in trying to focus our attention on the water." "So she leads you to the lake, points to it deliberately, promptly vanishes. Could it be she's showing you where you might find her remains, I wonder?" "She didn't look dead, sir," I assured him. "No," repeated the chorus of voices from my agreeing friends. "Sir, she didn't look dead," they all agreed. The sheriff's face broke out into a broad beam, like the bright sunshine on an overcast day, that try as he might he could not suppress. "Didn't look dead," he said. "Oh, I like the sound of that. I wish all the dead bodies on my watch didn't look dead. Does it not strike you as strange that she didn't talk to you at all?" "No, sir. Girls can be very silly at times. I happen to know this. I have a daft sister, sir. She's shy, ditzy, always hiding, giggling, and playing with her silly dolls. She's very childish, Sheriff. My mother says she'll grow out of it one day, but she's a big baby." "Ah, I see. So you think this puerile, flighty girl is rather like your sister?" "Well, I think lots of girls are silly, Sheriff. But yes, I think this girl was trying to be goofy with us, to get our attention, just like my ditzy sister. She always wants attention." "I see," said the sheriff. "One day you won't find girls as silly as you do now," he assured us. "Indeed, one day a silly girl might just win over your hearts," he said teasingly, raising an amused brow at us. Me and my friends exchanged disgusted looks between us, as if that very notion was nonsensical, while the sheriff let out a big laugh. "I think I'll get a couple of police divers to search the lake. I appreciate you coming here today to share your story. Many wouldn't have been so bold and forthcoming as you have been," he said, putting his hat back on his head, lifting it again and giving us a warm, congenial smile. "You may have just have solved a missing case. We shall see," he said in a gravelly voice. And then he was gone. That happened over 12 years ago. Sure enough, the police divers had dredged the lake, and the deceased body of the missing young girl had been recovered. The case was ruled as a homicide due to the coroner's report, whom established that the death was a result of blunt force injury to the head. The stepfather then confessed to accidentally killing his wife's young daughter in an argument over a pizza that he claimed he thought she had willfully eaten that had actually belonged to him. He was so angry, made worse by being inebriated, that he professed that the beer he'd been drinking was jolting up and down in his hands precariously, like a truck driving over rocky terrain. The beer had splashed out of his can as he was shouting at his little stepdaughter, spilling it over onto the tiled floor. She had snapped back at him, fighting her corner in protestation, skidding across the slippery surface, plunging head first into the granite counter, and she was knocked out cold. "I panicked," he told the sheriff, "when I realized she was dead. I just took her to a lake I knew well. I couldn't tell the wife. It would have destroyed her. I didn't want to put her through that grief. So I pretended she had mysteriously vanished into thin air or that she'd run away. I found out it was my wife that had eaten the pizza after all that. I've never been able to eat pizza since, by association, as the memories are so haunting." I think the man's outlandish claims did indeed line up with the coroner's findings, so he was charged with negligence in an accidental homicide. But who would ever have believed that the young girl's ghost would ultimately lead us directly to her body? It was extraordinary. I mean, how does that even happen from beyond the grave? But I know it did because we were witness to this ourselves. Growing up with my 3 best friends, this event had been one of the big deals in our lives that had firmly cemented our solid friendship still further. I was now engaged, getting married to my beautiful fiancée Abby in a few weeks' time. It had been Keith's idea for us to return to the cabin, so we could camp in the very same spot near the lake where we'd encountered the ghost of the young girl all those years earlier. And even after all this time, it was hard to fathom that she was actually a ghost, for she had seemed so real. "It's a great idea," Abby had said to me. "It's a fun way for you boys to have a bachelor party together, given you're all so close. You should take some flowers to scatter on the lake, to honour the dead girl, as after all she chose you to show the police where her body actually was. What was her name?" "Not sure," I said, suddenly feeling rather ashamed not to recall it. "It's on the tip of my tongue, I know it is. I can't remember. Susie. Sue, I think. But I like the flowers idea. Good thinking, Abby." "It's weird being back here," said my friend Colton, as we hitched our tent on the edge of the wooded area that flanked the lake. "Really weird. I still can't get over that girl being a ghost. She seemed so real, so lifelike. But remember, her dress was very white, and the abnormal way she moved, well, it wasn't natural," I said. "I'm so glad we came back here," said Keith, eyeing the lake with a look of wondrous awe on his face. "Let's not kid. It's magnificent. It brings so many nostalgic memories back to me." He wasn't wrong. The silvery lake twinkled, sparkled, and shimmered in the noonday sun, like a glittering mirror, reflecting the fluffy white clouds, blue sky, the pyramid shapes of the ponderosa pines upon its gleaming surfaces, while the soft moving ripples of the water occasionally distorted the picture, as the water veered forward and backwards, as if it was layered with a plethora of fine silvery mirrors beneath its watery depths. All across the valley, the ponderosa pines stood up proud and tall, their graceful trunks towering up into the cobalt blue sky like emerald giants, clustered together like people gathered at a sports stadium, as there were so many of them, too many to count. Then there was the undulating silhouettes in the far distance of the obscure, faint, purple hazy blurs of the mountains dappling the horizon, their stout, substantial foundations swathed in a bushy green carpet of trees. I could see a couple of feathery bald eagles soaring above the lake, their majestic brown wings outstretched, while their white heads, yellow beak, and taloned feet were spectacular to observe, as they glided with the air currents like wind-borne kites, levitating up into the skies. They were superb to watch as they hovered above us. This was the quintessential moment to remember Susan by, the girl that we'd seen all those years ago, who had led us to this lake, where her body had been discovered beneath its watery depths. We scattered the water with a kaleidoscope of pink, purple, and yellow blooms, as we all chose to remember her in this poignant moment, offering up a few prayers for her lost soul, like smoking spirals of incense rising up into the heavenlies. "Do you think she's still wandering around the lake?" James asked me. He was reflective. "I've heard once that in unforeseen tragic deaths the soul chooses to hang around its body, never moving towards the light." "I'm sure she would have moved on by now," I said. "I hope she's at peace." It wasn't long before we spent most of the afternoon fishing at the lake. We caught several large rainbow trout and a bass. We returned to camp and began to cook our delicious fish over the grill, which we ate with plenty of butter, garlic, and boiled potatoes, accompanied by seared spinach and buttered asparagus. It certainly didn't get better than this. There's something about her fresco eating that is out of this world. The freshly caught fish melted in the mouth like butter, tasting delectable on the tongue. "I hope we'll be friends forever," said James. "I don't want us to go our separate ways after we marry and have children of our own. We can't let that happen to our friendships. We need to stay in touch forever." "Here's to that," we said, raising our cans of beer in unison and taking large gulps. The night was spectacularly beautiful, under the light of the silvery stars, where the velvety black sky stretched out for an eternity. and the glowing, shimmering light of the white luminescent moon smiled upon us, making the visibility on this night excellent. We could hear the sounds of the crickets chirping, the frogs croaking, the trickling of the water from the lake, with the occasional splashing sounds of a fish rising above its wet surface and thrusting itself back into the water. We could hear the odd hoot of an owl, the lone call of a coyote. We willfully ignored all this enchanting background ambience as we drank beer, talked about my upcoming wedding, stared into the fire pit, our eyes lost in the golden allure of the crackling flames. As the night folded away, like the chapter in a book, exhaustion crept upon us with the stealth of a leopard, and then with wide-open yawns and drooping eyelids, we all agreed to turn in for the night. In the middle of the night, I was suddenly awoken to Keith shaking my body vigorously. I groaned. I was in the middle of a fabulous dream. Why did he have to wake me up right now? "Peter, I'm sorry to wake you," whispered Keith, "but after all that beer we drank this evening, I'm bursting to take a leak." "What's your problem?" I said, looking at him with a rising level of annoyance. "There's a bright moon out there, and you've got a torch, for goodness sake. You don't need me to escort you, surely. If the worst comes to the worst, couldn't you go in a bottle?" Keith ignored my belligerent protestations. "Please come with me, bro," he begged. "Something's giving me the heebie-jeebies out there. I did try to go, believe me, but something's creeping me out. I feel as if I'm being watched, stalked even." "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Keith. Your imagination is in overdrive as usual." I felt very peeved. I'm not going to kid. Keith could sometimes be a great big baby, I thought, but I knew better than to make a mountain out of a molehill. After all, it was my bachelor party in a manner of speaking. I should behave like a dutiful host, but right now I felt anything but. All right, I grumbled, trying to hide my annoyance. "I'll come. But now you've woken me up, well, I think I need to go as well." I grabbed my headlamp reluctantly, placing it on my head, following Keith out of the tent. I noticed the tension on his face had now relaxed, as he was so glad of my company. "We'll go towards those ponderosa pines over there," I said. "That will be a good spot for our ablutions, I imagine." Keith nodded in agreement. We both trudged over the dark, rocky, earthy terrain, moving over some broken treefall, leaves and rambling vegetation, crunching it beneath our feet, hearing the snapping sounds of the twigs breaking beneath us. Then I was suddenly hit with the overwhelming sensation that we were indeed being watched. It sent icy chills down my spine. Something felt seriously off, but I couldn't fathom exactly what it was. "You feel it too," said Keith, watching me intently. "I told you something's out there." I willfully ignored Keith's comments and feigned ignorance. "Of course stuff is out there, Keith," I barked. "But there is no need for you to overreact. It could be a bear, it could be anything. Even a Bigfoot," I teased, thinking the latter as unlikely as encountering a fairy on a tree. That was when both our eyes became pinned on a shadowy silhouette moving through the trees. By Jove, I thought, it's a bear, and a bad-tempered one at that, who is clearly quite miffed to have been disturbed by us. The creature appeared to be shaking the branches of the ponderosa pines backwards and forwards in extreme agitation. His sultry silhouette appeared to be swaggering backwards and forwards like a drunken soldier. Unusual behaviour, I thought, for a bear. All of a sudden we heard a mighty crack, thump and crash as a perfectly good ponderosa pine tree came thundering to the ground with a mighty force, landing not far away from us. Who and what could push down a tree like that without even batting an eyelid? It was nonsensical. "Bloody hell!" piped Keith, so agog that no words managed to escape from his mouth beyond that, as they were held hostage by his shock. I was not faring too well myself. My heart had literally jumped into my throat, and much like Keith, words failed me. Then we saw him, moving through the trees towards us. It sounded like the earth itself shook, groaned, heaved under his monumental weight as his heavy feet plundered the ground as if doing some kind of stamping Zulu dance. Even the ponderosa pines rattled and shook ominously on his approach. Then there he was, staring at us, with ferocious red eyes, ablaze with such incredulous indignation and fury. It was a Bigfoot, but an incensed one at that. It didn't take a rocket scientist to see that this creature wanted us gone, and gone now. I have no way of describing such a critter to you. as it is so unfathomable for me to behold a being of such size, girth, might, and weight. If you were to put a belligerent, angry elephant on 2 feet, transforming him into a bipedal, cover him with hair and human-like appearances, you might get a greater perspective of his size, power, and demeanour. This thing was elephantine in its proportions, strong, powerful, lofty, majestic, intimidating, aggressive, very, very aggressive. In that moment I wanted to be anywhere else in the entire world but here. I could hear Keith almost choking the words "run" out of his throat, as if a piece of chewing gum was lodged in his air pipe. It would seem this creature had physically incapacitated us. Fear rocketed through us like fireworks taking off on the 4th of July. I don't know why. I could not move my legs, but in truth they felt as inoperative and as sluggish as blocks of cement beneath me. "Run," came Keith's desperate words, but he seemed so unable to heed his own advice. As for both of us, it felt as if our bodies were under some kind of immobilizing spell. This outlandish creature, all 8 foot 700 pounds of him, began to seesaw and billow like a drunk, backwards and forwards, almost as if his anger he felt towards us was skyrocketing and ascending with every lumbering swagger, as if he was working himself up into a frenzy, like the lather of bubbles in a soap, in order to unleash the full extent of his unmerciful wrath upon us. Almost as if he was about to explode in any given moment, like a bomb going off in a building, where you're left in no doubt that unless you get away, you would end up a victim of his deadly assault. The creature rolled back its lips, displaying a threatening jaw full of white glistening teeth. On first impressions you might have thought he was laughing at you, but not so. I think the jaw full of teeth with the mock laughing was designed to intimidate and threaten us, and it was seriously working. The creature began to scream. It was the most discomposing, high-pitched, intrusive sound that went right through you like a knife to the guts. Shrill, rather like an ambulance siren, but at the same time low and guttural. It was only when he started running after us that I finally found my feet. Never, and I repeat never, have I felt this level of trepidation and terror before, which has given me a new level of empathy for any living creature being stalked by a predator. I was certain I was about to die. All the excitement of my approaching upcoming wedding almost teased me, tormented me like the string on a hot air balloon that I could never catch, for it was beyond me. For it now seemed unreachable, just like a pipe dream, a fantasy, a fleeting hope that would never ever come to fruition. Every part of me was burning with terror. The terrible angst and dismay was coursing through my veins like a humid heat that could not be cooled. It was bubbling over in my veins. I didn't know I was screaming. I was only informed of this later, but according to my friends, I shrieked like a banshee as 2 frightened heads of my once sleeping friends peered outside the tent to see what on earth was going on, and what this high-pitched screaming was all about. That was when they saw what was chasing me and Keith. That was when their faces registered dismay, horror, panic, dread. Colton darted out of the tent with his rifle. Now he's a fine marksman with an excellent shot, a steady hand. But as he held the rifle, this man of steel became like a gibbering idiot. He was trembling so much that he barely managed to keep the rifle straight, which made me feel very sure we were pretty much all dead, not confident of our chances in surviving this attack. The creature was now yards behind us. He was breathing intensely like a horse, seething with rage, eyeing us through deep-set dark eyes that had become frenzied. Suddenly a shrill whistle could be heard coming from the woods. The large Bigfoot stopped dead in his tracks as he heard the whistle. His face visibly changed. The anger and tension ebbed away. His blazing red eyes softened. His jaw seemed to relax. And then he stood there with an expression on his face of such jubilation that his former hostility evaporated. He even looked at us with sparkling eyes, devoid of any hostility, as if we had suddenly morphed from enemies into friends and were sharing in his delight. In the tree line we saw the shadowy outline of a female Bigfoot. I couldn't see her clearly. She was very obscure, but I did see her breasts. I swear to you that once the angry Bigfoot looked towards that female, it was as if she was a goddess. The euphoria in his face was undescribable. I've never seen anything like it. This male Bigfoot was head over heels in love with that female. Of that there was no doubt in my mind. We watched in awe as he glided away towards the female. His former anger subsided, now buried in the past. When he reached the female's side, he began to let out a sequence of happy whoops. Whoop! 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 And then he glided into the forest with her by his side. Needless to say, we needed no further encouragement to get the hell out of the place as fast as we possibly could. But we all came to the conclusion that the male Bigfoot had fallen out with the female and was on the receiving end of a great deal of upset, which was why he had expressed his indignation towards us, rather seeing us like a punching bag, I imagine. It led me to conclude that these emotionally intelligent creatures are very human. But I will say this to you. You don't want to be at the mercy of a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I was tearing up to see Mrs. Beaver leaving my ranch, although I didn't want her to see me visibly upset, as it would make it all the more difficult for her to leave. Yet this loyal, fun-loving woman had been a beloved, much-loved fixture and fitting on my ranch for over 20 long years now, having moved into the southerly quarters of my abode to manage the domestic routine affairs of everyday life with an abundance of flair. I would come into my kitchen after a hard, grueling day's work, with the welcoming, inviting and treasured smells of home enveloping me with a cosy reassurance. I would see Mrs. Beaver standing over the range with a wooden spoon in her hands, stirring away vigorously at a bubbling cauldron of jam. You could smell the delicious aromas of blueberries, strawberries, thimbleberries, foaming and frothing in the sugar syrup. You could hear Mrs. Beaver cheerfully singing away to her heart's content in her pretty musical voice, like blue clear sky, happiest girl in the USA, and it's great to be alive, while my golden retriever Golden Sun always remained by her side diligently, lying strewn outstretched across the stone floor, a mass of buoyant springy strawberry blonde curls, wallowing in the gladsome presence of this jolly woman, who filled the house with her robust, sparkling, ebullient love, that was as infectious as it was delightful. To all intensive purposes, even my two rescue pussycats, Bobby Joe and Mercedes, had taken to lying on the voluptuous plushy settee in the far corner of the well-appointed country-style kitchen, just to be close to this congenial, endearing woman, who was like a ray of sunshine on a freezing cold day, their comfort-seeking silken bodies luxuriating in the blissful warmth of a sunny Colorado morning. Mrs. Beaver had moved into the ranch seamlessly after my marriage to my wife Alexa had failed superbly. Why I had married a city slicker is beyond me, as Alexa was as comfortable with ranch life as I would be at home on a crowded beach. I think I was young and naive at the time, believing myself to be in love with this fickle young woman, who was pleasingly easy on the eye, but good looks, I was soon to learn, was not enduring. They could fade away as quickly as new curtains in the sunshine. I had blazingly ignored the wise warnings of my late father, who had assured me that Alexa was not cut out for ranch life, but I had refused to listen. "Look at her nails, son," my father had said. "They're fricking ridiculous. They look more like dangerous sharp knives than natural nails. They're covered in glitter like Christmas baubles on a Christmas tree. If that's not bad enough, I saw how dreadfully upset she got when one of her nails snapped. She looked utterly mortified. At first I thought something bad had happened. Asked her what the matter was. She said her nail had broken. I knew in that moment, son, she wasn't cut out for ranch life. You need a gal with a bit of grit behind her teeth, who's not adverse to getting some dirt under the fingernails. Not pouncing around the ranch like the Queen of Sheba. Oh, it wouldn't surprise me if that gal of yours indulges in milk baths like Cleopatra, dips all her strawberries in melted chocolate. Son, we have got bigger fish to fry here on the ranch. Crying over a broken nail. Well, that doesn't wash with me. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous. Your mother would be turning in her grave to witness such a sorry, pathetic and sad sight. If that's not bad enough, that woman can't cook a bloody thing. What kind of a ranch wife will she make? She's no domestic goddess, let me tell you. That meal she made last Tuesday night left something to be desired. What was it? It was chicken and dumplings, I think. The dumplings were so hard, I could have hit a hole-in-one with one of them on the golf course. No problem at all. As for that chicken, it was tougher than some of the crocodile-hide cowboy boots I own. And believe me, son, those boots of mine are hell of a tough. She's just feminine, Pops, I had piped, trying to defend my wife-to-be's honour, but failing desperately in my lousy attempts. Feminine? Ha ha! My foot, laughed my father. You call a glitzy set of nails feminine? He snorted. In my book, son, a feminine woman is like a gentle doe, caring for her beloved fawn. A soft, loving, unassuming energy that is not demanding, but reassuring, kind. But Alexia, I think the only thing she cares about is Alexa. That's not feminine, son. That's narcissistic. My father had been right, not that I'd wanted to admit it at the time. Once we were married, I was assaulted daily by a crescendo of tireless complaints. I hate it here. It's so boring. There's nothing to do. Alexa would pipe, stamping her foot in annoyance like a petulant child, her lips pouting in a permanent sulk, her exasperated eyes rolling in her head like marbles on a floor. There were times she would pace up and down the house like a lion in a zoo enclosure, as if she was bored out of her skull. I assure you there was nothing even remotely boring about my ranch. With a little initiative, you could find a copious amount of things that needed doing. Furthermore, we didn't live too far from the town, where she could have got her hair done regularly, or even met up with a girlfriend or two for coffee from time to time. But in Alexa's case, she rose from bed at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Did nothing apart from a couple of workouts on television, following some strange blonde woman wearing a pink headband, complemented by a scintillating pink leotard, who Alexa thought had a body to die for. I didn't see it personally myself, but there you go. Whatever makes a girl happy, I suppose. Then there was the constant soaking in long bubble baths all day long, drinking large glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon, getting giggly and inebriated, where everything in the household suddenly became terribly funny. Then the rest of her day, into the late evening, she would be glued to her cell phone, tapping away at it like a bird at a sea tray, talking to all her New York friends, no doubt complaining bitterly about her sorry state, being trapped on a horse ranch with me. If that wasn't revealing enough, even Golden Sun and my 2 cats gave her a wide berth, regarding her with secret looks of disdain. The ranch kitchen literally looked like a catastrophe after I married Alexa, worse than when I actually lived on my own. Forget the feminine touch, there wasn't one. It looked like a bomb had blown up in the place, as every pot and pan had been used by Alexa, often was abandoned and forsaken like a half-drowned kitten on the side of the road. Some so incinerated by having been left on the range for far too long, having nearly brought down the house in flames that had to be abated by my swift, efficient hands using a fire extinguisher. The sink invariably would always be piled high with dirty dishes, which my father would wash because, yes, you've guessed it. "Oh, I can't possibly wash dishes, not with nails like this," she would exclaim. "They'd be ruined. Do you know how much they cost me?" Slowly but surely Alexa would return to New York for fleeting visits with her friends, but her absence from the ranch became longer and longer with every visit. I found when she wasn't around, I could breathe again. One day she didn't come back at all, but a month later I did receive the divorce papers. It didn't upset me at all. In truth, I was heartily relieved. It was finally all over. I never had to see that girl again. I lived in an exquisite part of Colorado, with no neighbours to speak of, in what I would describe as a rare private property, that looks like a superbly maintained park, a tranquil oasis nestled above a huge silvery lake, graced by a sizable dock. The silvery blue water so clear you could see fish swimming around in the lake. I would keep it fully stocked with an abundance of fish like bass, bluegill, catfish, along with a spring-fed river that was accessorized by an attractive but sturdy wrought-iron bridge. Then there were the voluptuous rocky outcrops scattered close to the lake's edge, gathered together in an undulating collection of smooth, shapely boulders. Their interesting, unique shapes caressed the eye with an appreciation of all things intrinsically sculptural and artistic. But the master of this phenomenal collection was hundreds of years of weather erosion to smooth away the surfaces so meticulously. All these natural, transfixing, prepossessing scenic wonders were illustriously laid beneath the dazzling, vast expanse of a Colorado cobalt blue sky. My huge, sprawling property opened out into a vast private entrance. A quarter of a mile of concrete driveway, fringed by medium-sized trees on one side, surrounded by billowing, oscillatory green fields on the other. Then dotted hither and thither across this sparkling sanctuary were ubiquitous trees clustered together in large congenial groupings. The ranch itself, a sprawling ranch-style home, surrounded by a substantial wraparound porch, overlooking mesmerizing views of the lake. The semicircular driveway on a U-turn leads you further into the heart of the Colorado countryside, passing a couple of chicken coops, RV parking, and as you continue upwards through this blissful verdant oasis, you will find fields of frolicking horses, stables, barns, equestrian rings, you name it, it's all there. The quintessential horse ranch. "Boone Charleston," piped Mrs. Beaver, putting her hand on her hip, looking at me directly through her fiery blue eyes. "Why, I do believe the man is sad to see me go. You don't fool me, son. I can see you're tearing up. Your eyes are so sad. Bless you, dear." "Of course I'm sad, Mrs. Beaver. What do you expect? You're a huge part of my life. Have been so for 20 long years. Seeing you go like this, well, it's not easy to stomach, let me tell you." "Oh, Boone," sighed Mrs. Beaver, taking me lovingly into her arms, cupping my face into her hands, while she tugged gently at the dimples on my cheeks. "I'm going to miss you too. I'm going to miss this place. Golden sun, the cats, all the horses. This place has been my home for so long, longer than I can ever remember. I've grown to love it all, and more to the point, love you all. It breaks my heart to have to leave." "But why do you need to go, then?" A lonely tear spilled down Mrs. Beaver's cheek, which she hastily wiped away. "You know I need to be with my daughter, Boone. She has breast cancer. I need to be with her during this tumultuous time. She really needs me." "But you will be coming back, won't you?" I asked eagerly. "Please, Mrs. Beaver, say you'll be coming back. You can bring your daughter here to recuperate after the chemotherapy. The ranch will do her the world of good. I don't want to lose you, Mrs. Beaver." Mrs. Beaver shook her head of grey curls vigorously. She looked sad. Another tear rolled down her cheek. "Look what you're doing to me, Boone," she said. "You're making me go all mushy like this inside. I didn't want this to happen before I left. If I'm not careful, I'll be crying more tears than the water is in that lake of yours. No, Boone, I won't be coming back. Yes, I'll come to visit you, but to live, no." "But why?" I asked, tears accumulating on the fringe of my eyelashes like raindrops. Grown men did not cry, especially a cowboy like myself, but Mrs. Beaver had become like a mother to me. Seeing her go was quite literally breaking my heart. "I'm not getting any younger, Boone. Otherwise I would snap up your offer in a heartbeat. You know I would." "I just wish," she said, her voice almost crumbling under the pain of her emotions, like the loose scaffolding on a roof. "I just wish," she said gently. I wish," her voice faded away into such a low tone that it became barely audible. "I wish," she said, straightening herself up so that her unswerving perpendicular back looked as linear as a pencil, "that you would get yourself a good wife, Boone Charleston. You're a good man. You need a good wife." "You know how I feel about that, Mrs. Beaver," I said, my mind trying to eliminate any stinging, haunting memories of my ex-wife Alexa. "Well, failing that," she said, opening her purse, pulling out a notebook, tearing out a piece of paper, which she firmly handed to me. I took the liberty of advertising for a live-in housekeeper for you. I interviewed many applicants on your behalf while you were in the fields with your horses. This is the lady I think you should hire. She seems very keen. I think she's in her early 60s. I was terribly impressed with her. She's got all the old Southern values that we admire so much, but by all accounts is also an excellent Southern cook, who assures me she can make the best stew and dumplings on the planet. We know how you love your stew and dumplings, Boone." I took the paper from Mrs. Beaver reluctantly, glancing down at the name. It was true I would need a housekeeper, but there was no one who could fill Mrs. Beaver's shoes. Never, ever. She was irreplaceable. One-of-a-kind type of person that you just couldn't replicate. Flower Macpherson, I read the name out loud. Mrs. Beaver looked at me awkwardly. There's just one problem, Boone. She does have baggage. I raised a quizzical brow. How so? She has 2 grandchildren in her charge, 2 boys to be exact. One about 10, the other going on 12, who have to live with her here on the ranch with you. I see, I said, not liking the idea of 2 kids charging around my ranch like a pair of rambunctious bull terriers, screaming, shouting, whistling. I could only imagine the horrors. Where are the parents? A fatal car accident wiped them out about 8 years ago, I gather. The children have no memory of their parents, so she's become their guardian, so to speak. Sad story. I know what you're thinking, Boone, said Mrs. Beaver, looking at me intently through her pale blue cornflower eyes. What am I thinking, Mrs. Beaver? You're thinking, Boone, that 2 kids would drive you doodle alley. You may be right, but a place like this needs some young blood. A couple of kids running around this ranch of yours might just liven up the place a bit. It would do you good having children around the place. A youthful, whimsical, fresh energy could be just what the doctor ordered. I must admit, once Mrs. Beaver left my ranch, it was as if the sunshine had been vanquished from my home. Nothing was the same. Even Golden Sun, along with my 2 cats, had sunk into a deep depression without her around. My presence was a poor substitute to the spirited, mirthful, and effervescent Miss Beaver. The untidy kitchen was in a dreadful shambles, my lack of culinary prowess conspicuous, along with the accumulation of dirty dishes that graced every available surface. Even a poached chicken I'd cooked for the cats was eyed scathingly and approached with due caution. Gone were the delicious aromas of mac and cheese, biscuits and gravy, apple pie, along with cinnamon buns. In the twinkling of an eye, my once cosy, mellow, cheerful and restful ranch had become like a mausoleum, until I could bear it no more, as the oppressive lonesome energy was completely suffocating. I phoned up Flower Macpherson, offering her the job on the spot, trusting in Mrs. Beaver's instincts about the woman, wilfully resigning myself to my plight of having 2 young boys on my ranch, something I wasn't looking forward to at all, but needs must. I would just have to grin and bear it, rather like that dreaded trip to the dentist twice a year that I would sooner rather avoid. Within a day of Flower Macpherson moving into the ranch, the heavy atmosphere lifted. Granted, she was not Mrs. Beaver, nor would she ever be, but she was a jolly good replacement nevertheless. Even Golden Sun seemed to think so, as once again she was thumping her tail happily on the kitchen floor, and running with gusto after a plethora of tennis balls the 2 young boys zealously threw for her around the lake. It was as if the old dog had recaptured her youth all over again. She would dive into the lake with an enthusiastic fervour to retrieve the sticks the boys threw for her, then climb out of the water, shaking her locks of creamy golden hair so vigorously, so no one in sight of her did not escape without a good showering. My 2 cats seemed to gravitate towards Flower, purring profusely, rubbing their sleek bodies against her legs, as if to mark their territory, laying claim of ownership over the woman. Flower Macpherson had a soft southern drawl that rather reminded me of a babbling brook. She was gentle, calming. Her grey hair was tucked away from her face in a bright scarf. Her well-upholstered, rounded figure bustled around the kitchen like a worker bee. Furthermore, she was a sensational, outstanding cook, as delicious smells wafted around the house. My ranch had become a home again. As for the 2 young boys, Lance and Wade, I would give them a wide girth, I thought, but it seemed that they were not adverse to crowding in on my space at any given opportunity, bugging the hell out of me with annoying questions and effusive bursts of excited exuberance. "Mr. Charleston, can I ride the horse?" I would mumble something under my breath, wilfully ignoring the boy. "Mr. Charleston, please can I ride the horse?" Slowly but surely, those 2 loathsome, rambunctious, energetic boys began to steal my heart. At first annoyance morphed into disapproval, then disapproval morphed into tolerance, then tolerance morphed into acceptance, and acceptance morphed into love. It hit me hard like a brick to the head. That was one day when I realized that I loved these kids as if they were my own flesh and blood. Believe me, no one was more astounded by this startling revelation than myself. Within a short period of time, I had introduced these 2 energetic, ebullient, industrious and assiduous young boys to every single aspect of ranch life. Outside of their schoolwork, of course, that is. They were natural, pertinacious, unflagging cowboys, destined to follow in my footsteps. They weren't even my own children, yet they loved nothing better than exploring the countryside with me, on horseback, or riding on the back of our ATVs in the woods, or fishing at the lake with me, or even engaging in a good spot of hunting. They solicitously enjoyed it all. Believe me, we had some good times together, very good times. I was beginning to realise that without their presence in my life, life would be a lot less thrilling. "We made a new friend today, Mr. Charleston," said Lance over the large oak table in the kitchen, where we were gathered together to enjoy the evening meal that had been superbly cooked by Flower Macpherson. He said this as he popped a whole new potato into his mouth, gobbling it hungrily, without even bothering about the social graces of actually keeping his mouth shut while he chewed. "He was ever so nice, but he doesn't speak a word of English. He's very, very hairy." "Oh, so you met Alejandro, I take it. No, he doesn't speak English very well. He's a Mexican immigrant, you see. But to date he's been very handy around the ranch. And yes, I suppose he could do with a shave, come to think of it. He is rather hairy." "You know him?" asked Lance excitedly. His blue eyes appeared to be dancing up and down with delight. "I really, really like him, Mr. Charleston. He's the most exciting person I've ever met in my entire life, even though he is very hairy." "Oh, he's so cool," nodded Wade in agreement. "And strong, too. Very, very strong." At this bold, startling revelation from the two young boys, I was bewildered, if not a tad jealous, of this effusive, generous outburst of genuine affection directed towards my less than agreeable farmhand. Not to put too fine a point on it, Alejandro Iglesias was, in my opinion, hardly the life and soul of the party. He grumbled a lot, muttered under his breath, approached some of his duties on the ranch with about as much enthusiasm as a bee has over a can of sugarless cola. There were times he had been so disagreeable, cantankerous, belligerent, and downright annoying that I'd even considered giving him his calling cards. But these two kids were beguiled by this less than agreeable man. "Did he now?" I said, a rising level of annoyance creeping up in my throat like a congealed fog. My ranch hand had shirked his responsibilities, was taking time off to play with Lance and Wade behind my back when he had so many other jobs he needed to do. How dare he, I thought. I'd have some stiff words with him in the morning, I decided. The following day Alejandro did not look best pleased when I pulled him to one side for a chat. The frown on his sallow-skinned face visibly deepened, as if he was expecting me to give him a long list of other jobs he needed doing. "Hello, sir," he said to me in his broken English. "What you want?" "Alejandro," I said, "I would appreciate it if you focused on your job at hand. Stop playing with the children." The frown on Alejandro's face became more entrenched, like a railway track. He looked at me with his beady brown eyes, as if he thought I'd lost leave of my senses. He shook his jet-black mane of curls, with a belligerence of note. "You think this is funny? You think this is a joke? Funny?" he sniped. How can I play with my children in Mexico, sir? I wish I could play, but they are far, far away." "I know you played with the children, Alejandro. I know about the fish you caught at the lake." Fish? I do fish at the lake," said Alejandro. "We will say no more about it," I said, realizing swiftly that Alejandro was not about to confess to anything fast. "I know the children like you, but you've got a job and responsibility on the ranch. I don't pay you to go dilly-dallying around." "Dilly-dally? I don't know who sir he is. I know no dilly-dally. I don't know dilly-dally. I took no fish from lake. Your children, nor my children, are Mexico," he said, rolling his eyes in frustration and wilfully ignoring me, as he continued to muck out the stables with a gusto that I was not accustomed to seeing. Over the next few days, the kids kept telling me how wonderful Alejandro was, and it was like a red flag to a bull. It made me more and more enraged. "Mr. Charleston, you should have seen the rock he picked up today. I don't even think you could do it, pick up a rock so big. And you're strong. But he threw it into the lake as if it was a pebble. He did it again and again and again, didn't he?" It's true, piped Wade excitedly. He picked up dozens of these rocks, Mr. Charleston. He could hit the targets exactly right. He was brilliant. You should have seen him. What targets? I asked. Well, anything we pointed at. He hit it dead on. You know, like landmarks, stuff like that. Now I was getting very flustered. It seemed that Wade and Lance were more than a little enamoured and reverent towards my ranch hand. This revelation was making me like the man less and less and less, if that were at all possible. In the beginning I didn't like him much, but now I positively despised him. More to the point, I loathed him. I realised in horror that an ugly jealousy had seeped through my veins like a rampant cancer, eating me alive from the inside out. It was more than I could bear to see Lance's dewy eyes talking about Alejandra like an illustrious American hero. It made me feel more than a little miffed and hot under the collar to hear all this. The boys were in awe of the idiotic imbecile, idolising him, putting him on a pedestal where he clearly didn't belong, elevating him to the realms of a demigod. It was ridiculous. I was having none of it. I was a damn sight stronger than that piddling, puny, pathetic 160-pound ranch hand of mine. I'd be happy to prove this point to Lance and Wade once and for all, should the need arise. I promise you, Mr. Charleston, continued Lance in a voice of reverent awe, you should have seen him. You should have seen him. You would have never been able to pick up a rock like that in your bare hands. Never, never. Wade interjected. Lance is right, Mr. Charleston. You couldn't lift a rock that size, even if you wanted to. You'd never be strong enough. We'll see about that, I said, the indignant colour rising in my cheeks, turning my face into a deep rosy pink. Why, I do believe you're jealous, laughed Flower, looking at me with a glint of amusement in her eyes. I tell you what, boys, tomorrow after lunch I will show you that I am much stronger than your Alejandra. You tell him to come to the lake, and we'll have a contest together. See who's the strongest. You'll see what I'm talking about. At that, Lance and Wade chuckled with laughter, clearly amused by this crazy idea. You'll never win, Mr. Charleston, chuckled Wade. Never! The following morning I busied myself in the ranch, extending my usual courtesies to a couple of the ranch hands on duty. I'll see you later, Alejandra. I'm looking forward to it at the lake, I said, giving him a wry, knowing grin. He looked at me, shook his head, muttered something under his breath that I couldn't hear. Thereupon I chose to arrive at the lake promptly after lunch, eager to show off my physical prowess. Not over here, Mr. Charleston, piped Lance. Our friend doesn't like to be seen close to the house. I bet he doesn't, I thought angrily to myself. He doesn't want to be caught shirking on his duties at the ranch. I could have guessed as much. I'd begun to realise that not only was Alejandra incredibly grouchy, but he was a sly, duplicitous character as well. I followed the two excitable boys by foot over the undulating countryside to a secluded part of the lake, fringed by weeping willows, with graceful boughs that cascaded into the water like overlong leafy arms. Over here, Mr. Charleston, said Lance, giving me a bright big grin. He was pointing at these massive boulders lying loosely by the side of the lake. You think you could lift one of these stones, Mr. Charleston? Bet you can't. I looked across at Wade with a nonplussed expression on my face. Is this some kind of a joke, Lance? Because I don't find it funny. There is no way it's humanly possible to lift a stone this size and throw it into the lake. Our friend can. No, he can't. No, he can't. He's coming, whispered Lance excitedly. He's coming. You'll see. I groaned inwardly. On the outside, I feigned a smile as we waited for my competitor to approach. I could hear hefty footfall thumping the ground with a ponderous vibration. Then someone was pulling back the curtains of the long leafy willows. At first I saw an arm, and then a face peering at me nervously. Then I saw him, all 8 foot 700 pounds of him. This was not Alejandra like I'd expected. This was a bloody Bigfoot. I was so stunned that I froze like a rock-hard statue. I tried to say something, but all that came out of my mouth was a silly squeak that made me sound more like a mouse than a man. I struggled to find words, but they eluded me, as did my ability to get the hell out of this place, for it seemed that my muscles were twitching in a series of spasms. I was powerless to do anything about it. Lance ran excitedly towards the Bigfoot, who looked so incredibly human it was almost uncanny. He pointed at the stones and then at me. The deep-set dark eyes of the creature twinkled with amusement, as if he understood perfectly what was going on. I did, however, discern that he was slightly wary of my guarded energy. Lance and Wade were like an open book to him, while I was enigmatic. It would seem that my trepidation and angst had not gone unnoticed by him. He was eyeing me with a degree of suspicion, as if he doubted that I could be fully trusted. I was stunned by how calm Lance and Wade were about their Bigfoot friend, who, although massively large, had a juvenile energy about him, suggesting to me that he was possibly just a teenager. Could they not see how potentially dangerous he was? Could they not discern that although he looked remarkably human, he certainly was anything but? I mean, this thing was massive in girth and size and weight, with overlong arms, powerful slender legs, a pyramid-shaped head, a human face, leathery skin, deep-set eyes. He was swathed generously from head to toe with long flowing dark brown hair that was scant under the arms and on the knees. This anomalous creature glided over to the stones deliberately, picking one large one up. The stone must have weighed a ton, but the creature picked it up without any struggle, as if it was as light as a pebble. "You see that tree over there?" said Lance, pointing it out to the Bigfoot. "Over there. I want you to directly throw it over there." I watched in awe as the creature, understanding exactly what the kids wanted from him, was all too eager to oblige their every need. He hurled the stone towards the trunk of a large tree, hitting his target seamlessly. The hefty stone whacked the tree, then flew backwards, descending into the depths of the lake. I could hardly believe it. What an extraordinary shot! "Your turn, Mr. Charleston," said Wade, looking eager. "You keep telling us how strong you are. You keep saying you can do it. It's your turn now." "I'm not sure, Wade, that this is a very good idea after all," I said, as all eyes, including the Bigfoot's, were now pinned directly on me. I moved towards the hefty stone, but I couldn't budge it from the ground. Lance, Wade, and the Bigfoot began to laugh, and yes, if you must know, Bigfoots can laugh. I saw his jaw open wide, his teeth displayed in their full glory. He was bobbing his jaw up and down, while a deep guttural throaty gurgle emerged from the depths of his throat. I could see that he was finding my inability to even lift the stone as amusing as both of the kids did. "I told you couldn't do it, Mr. Charleston," they giggled. "I told you could never lift a stone that large, but you really seem to think you would be able to." The Bigfoot looked at me with a twinkle in his eyes, but in their depths I could detect a glimmer of empathy, as if he felt sorry for me. In that second my heart melted towards him. I could see that this teenage Bigfoot clearly had a heart of gold. I regret to say that the Bigfoot was not on our ranch for very long. It appeared that his whole family are like nomads, never overstaying their welcome in any one place, which was devastatingly sad for the two children, who missed their hairy friend very much, who had brought them so much joy in their short acquaintance. I asked those two kids if I might adopt them, and they didn't hesitate to become my adopted children, making me a very happy man indeed. They're grown up now and live on my ranch with their own families on different houses on the property, and the three of us run the family business together. Sadly, their grandmother passed away 10 years ago, and within 2 days of her death, so did my best friend, Mrs. Beaver. Both are sorely missed, lovingly remembered. However, those two boys are as good as my own sons, better even, so I consider myself a very lucky man indeed. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. The bell tinkled. The glass door was pushed inwards of Annabelle's, the old-world antique shop. An elderly woman with white curly hair burst through the door, along with a blustering gust of unwelcome, stinging, icy Arctic air that entered with her, causing the cool temperature of the shop to plummet considerably. I was working behind the counter at the time, polishing up a pair of sizable, highly ornate silver teapots that had belonged to one of Ireland's most prominent aristocratic families, whose grandiose, vast residence had been taken over by the government in World War II, to transform the sprawling residence into a hospital, as the demand for hospital beds was rife at the time. My father's antique shop had acquired some of the family's highly esteemed heirlooms, these silver rococo teapots being among some of them. For they had entertained, for lavish high teas, the likes of George Bernard Shaw, Yeats, and Lady Gregory, Ireland's greatest woman. So there would be many eager buyers, more than a little enthusiastic, to own such an invaluable possession. I began vigorously rubbing away years of tarnished metal that was so black that this was no easy job. But slowly and surely the blackness began to recede, bringing out the gleaming silver that lay buried beneath. Annabelle's was a special shop, vastly different from your average antique shop, for my father, who opened the shop in the early 1970s, was an intrepid explorer who travelled the entire globe to bring back interesting items from all over the world, some with a fascinating story or history behind them. Things like an unusual embellished mirror that was sometimes mist, clouding all on its own, as if the reflective glass had become like moonstone. It would do this throughout the day for seconds at a time, for no apparent reason at all, leaving many of our startled customers completely flummoxed. "How can it do that?" they would exclaim in awe. Annabelle's contained some spectacular antiques. There was an interesting chair, ostentatiously carved, that had belonged to some African king. A mounted monkey's head that was acclaimed to bring you great luck if you dared to stroke it. A cannibal's necklace of human teeth. An old army uniform from the Second World War. An original picture of a ghostly apparition taken in some famous obscure Scottish castle walking down a sweeping ornate staircase. An antique leather-bound book of ancient legends. A Chippendale antique desk. A snuff box from the time of Billy the Kid. A silver inkwell once owned by Beatrix Potter. A very unusual French antique doll. Eclectic tortoise-shell sunglasses that were acclaimed to have once belonged to Marilyn Monroe. All kinds of stuff like that, along of course with your usual less colourful items that you would invariably find in other antique shops as well. Yet it was my father's passion to buy items of history with a story behind them, for people love purchasing the unusual and bizarre. But an item with a story always quadrupled its value on every conceivable level, for it would seem people loved stories of any kind, as indeed did I, especially stories so outlandish and incredulous they seemed almost impossible to believe. I looked up as the old woman began to approach me cautiously, with the reluctant stealth of a leopard, along with an air of indifference that gave me the distinct impression she would rather be anywhere else in the entire world than in this charming idiosyncratic antique shop, where you could find all kinds of unusual spectacular gifts, from the eclectic, vintage, to the avant-garde, and even the futuristic. Indeed, we had it all, to appeal to every imagination, every taste, every style. After all, one man's junk may just indeed be another man's treasure. I could see she was limping as she shuffled along awkwardly on her walking stick, in a very flat pair of navy blue court shoes, her willowy ailing body clearly taking strain under her enfeebled lumbering efforts to reach the desk, rather like a half-uprooted gnarled tree battling against the precarious current of a feisty wind. She was fragile, about 4 foot tall, with a skin so fine it was almost translucent. I could see her frenzied pale blue eyes darting around the shop like a ferret, as if she was looking for something of great significance. She looked like a woman deeply troubled, discomposed if you like, as if something had truly ruffled her feathers. "Need any help?" I asked the prostrate woman, giving her a warm, encouraging smile. I knew better than to pounce on people when they entered the shop, as most people preferred to be left to themselves, to meander around, whilst marvelling in all the items on display. She did not respond to my smile. Her face was fixed, her intent purposeful, her gait determined. "I'm looking for a ring," she said. "A blue sapphire, to be exact." "Well, let's see if I can be of any help," I said, reaching into a glass cabinet in front of me, drawing out onto the glass counter a vast selection of antique rings to show her. "What did you have in mind? I've got several sapphire rings as it happens right here. Some of them are really quite beautiful. Now this one here is terribly, terribly pretty. I have been told it's about 200 years old. It's rumoured that this beguiling exquisite piece may have been worn by Grace Kelly, but I'd like to specify it's only a rumour." The woman wilfully ignored my words. While her attentive eyes were industriously engaged, they travelled down the long column of rings that were so elegantly displayed against the dark velvety cushioned upholstered padding of the ring box. It was like her eyes were examining every single ring in detail, as if her life quite literally depended on it. "It's not here," she said finally, her frightened brown eyes registering alarm. She looked up at me with an expression of grave concern, her hands trembling, her jaw tightening, while her frail, unstable body visibly stiffened. For a second she looked like a white mannequin. "Sorry," I said. "What's not here? I'm not following you, ma'am." "Let me explain better. My daughter, well, she sold you some pieces of my old jewellery. I decided to sell them off. It made a lot of sense to me. You see, I'm moving into a retirement home shortly. I've been downsizing my life, so to speak. Well, she wasn't supposed to sell that ring. She wasn't supposed to sell it. I did warn her about it. But she sold it. I can't believe she sold it to you." "Oh, I see," I said, my eyes softening. "The ring is sentimental to you, is it? I think I can understand that. It's very hard to let go of stuff you really love, let alone replace it. Some things are irreplaceable. It must have been an oversight on her part. I'm quite sure she didn't intentionally mean to sell it behind your back like that." "You don't understand! You don't understand!" said the woman, grabbing my arm, taking me by surprise as she squeezed it ever so tightly with an urgent pressure that was impressive for one so frail. Her pale blue eyes bored into mine with the intensity of a jackhammer that was so profound. "You don't understand! You don't understand! That sapphire! It isn't an ordinary sapphire. There is something wrong with that ring. It is dangerous, very, very dangerous," she announced. "It's cursed. If a person buys that ring and wears it, they will almost certainly die. They will almost certainly die. Do you understand what I'm saying? They will die." At that, my mouth dropped open like a Venus flytrap in surprise. This was an appalling revelation, one that I had not expected. A cold chill jolted down my spine in a series of electric spasms, as her ominous words hung in the atmosphere like a bad, noxious smell that could not be abated. Even my heart rate had increased in intensity, as I hardly wanted to be responsible for selling someone a cursed item. You would think that a woman's outlandish, nonsensical, emotional display would have left me believing she was unhinged or as nutty as a fruitcake. But I assure you, working with antiques as I have done so for many years, this was most certainly not the case. I have seen strange things over the years, very, very strange things. For indeed, phantasmic items have crossed my path with eerie supernatural tales behind them that are so bizarre they would make your hair curl. It's not something I've ever willingly talked about in an open forum, as there are some insider secrets in the antiques business that you prefer not to discuss with locals, such as haunted, jinxed, unearthly or cursed objects being among many of those discussions. So this was not the first time I'd heard of a cursed item, nor would it be the last. I had enough quintessential experience behind me to know that the woman's outrageous claims may not be as preposterous or as far-fetched as they initially seemed. "I suppose you're going to think I'm silly, a silly batty old woman," she said, with my head in the clouds, but I assure you I'm not. I need that ring back. I need it back desperately. If someone wears that ring, it will likely kill them. I'm not exaggerating about this. Believe me, I know. Now, it's a pretty oval sapphire. It's surrounded by a cluster of white diamonds. Do you recall selling it at all?" "As it happens, I do. I know the one. It was a very beautiful ring. We sold it about 2 weeks ago. I can check the records if you like, to find out who bought it." "That would be so good, very good," said the old lady, looking heartily relieved, as if my words brought her a great measure of reassurance. "You sit down," I said, pulling out an upholstered chair for the woman. "You look as white as a ghost. The colour has completely drained from your face." The old woman sank back gratefully onto the cushioned chair, luxuriating, wallowing in its comfort, so relieved to finally be getting the weight off her weak legs. "I'm going to make you a nice hot cup of tea," I told her. "Then you can tell me all about this mysterious ring of yours, and its connection to a curse, of course." I could tell the woman's energy had been drained from her. She looked fatigued. She needed some sweet tea, and fast, I thought. "Oh, would you, dear? I'm half parched. It's freezing cold out there. My word, the weather is terrible. My whole body is shaking like a leaf. I'm not used to shopping around town these days, especially in wintry conditions like this. My body's not as agile as it used to be. I do get terribly tired." "Of course you do," I said. "It's perfectly understandable." Before long, the woman was sitting opposite the counter, drinking a cup of piping hot sweet tea. Her arthritic fingers wobbled precariously, jiggling the bone china cup and saucer in her hands. For a moment I seriously thought she was going to drop the hot tea all over herself. "Oh, that is so good, dear," she sighed. "You do make an excellent cup of tea." "Now for the record," I told the old lady. "If it's any consolation to you, I do not think you're batty. On the contrary, the reverse is true. If you look around this antique shop of my father's, there's a plethora of items in here that have belonged to people long since deceased. Every physical object can carry an energy signature or imprint of a person on it. I know that now to be profoundly true. On occasion there can be a paranormal attachment to something. I've witnessed this myself firsthand. Sometimes we've even had ghostly activity here in the shop, usually occurring soon after we purchase an item to sell. So I'm well acquainted with the abnormal, should we say." "What kind of ghostly activity are you talking about?" asked the woman, her curiosity now aroused. "Oh, I could tell you many stories," I said, taking a large sip of tea and replacing the cup onto the counter. "I mean, I've been eyewitness to queer stuff going on in here, like the electrics going ballistic, or the shop becoming as cold as ice, almost as if a Siberian sub-zero temperatures have suddenly entered the shop on their own accord. There are times I've sensed I'm not alone, that I'm being watched, but nobody's ever there. I always go and check, but nobody is. Then there are other times I've heard distinct chattering voices, conversations so obscure that you can't even hear what someone is saying, but it sounds as though they're in the shop only yards away from you. And when I move towards the chatter, it just suddenly stops, almost as if they're aware of my presence, whoever they are. It's easy to think you're going daft, or your imagination is in overdrive, but that is not the case. There are times I've been physically touched as well, where I can feel a cold hand brushing against my face. That creeps me out a lot. So you could say I've had some outlandish experiences here at Annabelle's that, shall we say, are more than a little bizarre. I'll give you an example of a very strange experience I had here in the shop. There was a young man here in his 30s, a handsome-looking man actually, very easy on the eyes, wearing 1900 clothes. He stood here larger than life before me. He was as real as you and me, so I never had reason to doubt his physicality, although on reflection he was decidedly pale. I never saw or heard him enter the premises, as the bell would normally tinkle to alert me to a customer. On this occasion I never heard it. He was a very distinctive gentleman. He was wearing a distinguished-looking, superbly tailored navy blue short-fronted tailcoat, along with a matching fitted waistcoat, which he wore over a white linen shirt, with a matching white linen neckcloth, a pair of tight-fitting caramel-coloured pantaloons, and a pair of knee-high dark brown Hessian boots, lined with a caramel leather trim. He looked very debonair, striking. He was wearing a tall beaver hat. He looked incredibly elegant, cultured, self-assured. I remember thinking he must be taking a part in some kind of reenactment of the 1800s, or 1900s rather, from the Historic Society, as they're situated a block away from Main Street. I've often seen them there, dressing up in fancy historic regalia to celebrate various events in our illustrious American history. In truth, I thought he was a superb actor, a brilliant one at that, who was having a bit of fun at my expense, giving I work in an antique shop of all things, surrounded by a tsunami of ancient relics. It made sense that he was having fun with me, I thought. I said to him teasingly, "Sir, you look the picture of sartorial elegance in your ensemble. I'm most impressed." I remember he looked at me with such a befuddled expression on his face. He responded to me in a crisp, pompous voice, with a level of elocution in his language far superior to ours. It was clear he was from American aristocracy. He said to me, "Young lady, I'm not here to receive the extravagance of your social niceties, as well-meaning as they may be. For indeed it is a man's honour to impress upon a woman a compliment in her manner of dress, rather than receive one for himself, to excite his own vanities. No, I'm not here to discuss such meaningless trivia with you. But in regards to a matter that holds my attention with a very grave concern, I want your resolute, tenacious assurance that you won't sell the golden pocket watch from Woolton Watch Company, which I have left so generously in your charge, under the auspicious umbrella of your vigilant protection, for it is indeed a priceless possession of which I hold in the greatest regard." "He said that to you? That's a mouthful." "Yes, he said that to me." Then he turned around and walked away, just like that. I don't even think I heard the tinkle of the bell as the door opened out into the street. The man was gone from the shop that quickly. I must admit I just shook my head, chuckled to myself, and actually thought if I were a film producer, I would almost certainly hire him on the spot for his remarkable interpretation of a 1900s gentleman. I thought it was all just an act. He was acting out his character, although I will admit I was rather bewildered that he knew about the Walton Watch Company for a start, and the pocket watch, as it had only just come into our possession. I gave the matter no further thought or attention until 2 days later, that is, when I sold the watch to a very eager client. I wrapped it up in a magnificent box, which I covered in fancy paper, with a pretty bow, along with the name of our shop on a sticker. I then placed the package in a pink cardboard box, with the name Annabelle's on it. The man was absolutely thrilled. It was his father's 70th birthday. He couldn't wait to buy him something extra special to celebrate the grand, illustrious occasion. He thought the watch he was buying from us was the quintessential perfect gift, perceiving that his father would be tickled pink, as he had a sizable collection of 1900 pocket watches already, so this pocket watch would be a great piece to add to the collection. Suffice to say, the customer came back to my shop in a dreadful, appalling state, claiming his father had opened the present in front of him, and the box was empty. As you can imagine, he'd seen me wrap up the present himself, so his feathers were well and truly ruffled. He couldn't understand what was going on. The pocket watch had literally vanished into thin air. It was like something you'd expect to see in a Vegas magic show. I pulled out our collection of pocket watches, and sure enough it was placed back there in the glass cabinet, here in our shop. How did it leave the confines of a wrapped present, returning just to be in our cabinet all over again? It was very strange. I remember wrapping it up again, putting it in the box myself, repackaging it, and handing it back to the grateful customer, who took it home to give to his dad. But when his father opened the box, once again it had vanished. Of course, I was to discover it had been safely returned to our glass cabinet over there. It's been sitting there for over 10 years, and it hasn't been short of admirers and people wanting to buy it. But I never let them buy it because I know what will happen. It'll just return to the shop. It's one of those objects that simply refuses to be sold. It's desirous to stay here, come hell or high water. I was to find out later from the Historic Society down the road that there was no man fitting that description on that day that was dressed up to the nines like that. So I'm forced to conclude that I had a conversation with a ghost. A ghost, it would seem, who's very particular over the safe keeping of his pocket watch. It's the weirdest, most enigmatic thing, to be so comfortably well acquainted with seriously weird stuff. So nothing you can tell me will surprise me or destabilise my lack of scepticism, for I've seen it all, believe me. So now, after my absurd revelation, I hope you'll be inspired to tell me yours, why you're so convinced that this sapphire ring is indeed cursed. The woman stammered awkwardly. Well, how do I begin? It belonged to my grandmother, actually. It was her engagement ring from my grandfather. She always loved sapphires. Anyway, shortly after they got married, they went to Africa for their honeymoon. It was a form of celebration. They loved Africa. My grandmother visited this remote African village out in the middle of nowhere. This was not your average African village. The people just stared at her because she was so white. They'd never seen a white person like her before a day in their lives, especially one so fair. The children ran up to my grandmother, touching her skin in reverent awe, unable to believe how light it was. They were talking to each other excitedly, exuberantly, regarding my grandmother as if she was some kind of a goddess. My grandmother asked the translator that was with them what the kids were saying about her. I gather they thought that she came from the stars, you know, like the Palladians or something. My grandmother and her husband were promptly bustled into this huge grass-rounded hut, which had an earthen floor. They were informed that the medicine man, or witch doctor if you like, wanted to see them. My grandmother was a fine woman of God, very intuitive. When she met the witch doctor, she felt chills going down her spine. Something about the man set her nerves on edge. She said she was certain he had a demonical energy about him. The witch doctor's attention was focused on my grandmother's ring. He asked if he might look at it, so she held out her hand before him. The man held her hand in his, studying the ring ever so intently, with a fixed, glazed look. My grandmother said she watched the man's eyes rolling in his head until they were totally white. He then blew on the stone from his mouth. To her horror, she physically discerned this purple smoke spiralling out of his mouth like the smoke from a chimney. It then whirled into the stone, promptly vanishing. My grandmother was so shocked she thought she must have imagined things, but my grandfather had witnessed it too. This was an anomalous event they couldn't understand. They asked the witch doctor what the smoke was for that he had blown into the ring, as, of course, they were more than a little perturbed. He assured them it was some kind of an ancient African blessing from the ancestors. Within a day after this event, my grandmother experienced the most horrendous shooting pains all over her body. After a doctor's visit, she was diagnosed with full-blown terminal cancer, given only a month to live. It was a devastating shock to my grandparents. They were in their early 20s at the time, with their whole lives ahead of them. It felt as if the rug had been pulled from beneath their feet. My grandmother suddenly remembered the strange purple smoke being blown into her ring by that witch doctor. She guessed it was nefarious, so she decided to stop wearing the ring, to see if her health improved. It did. It was very peculiar, because after she stopped wearing the ring, her skin went purple for a couple of days, the identical colour of the purple smoke that the witch doctor had blown into her ring. I gather the pain left her body almost immediately, and after a visit to the doctor's office, it was discovered she was cancer-free. My grandmother told her very sceptical, dubious sister what had happened. Her sister pooh-poohed the whole idea, insisted on wearing the ring for a few days to prove a point, and then she too ended up with full-blown cancer, which immediately vanished once she stopped wearing the ring. So now you know why I'm concerned about anyone who may be wearing that ring. If they continue to wear it, they will almost certainly die. I'm in no doubt about that. Worse still, they wouldn't know the ring is connected to their physical decline. It's that purple smoke that's locked in the sapphire. That's what kills the person. It's an extraordinary story, Mrs. Winthrop. Mrs. Winthrop, I repeated. I told you I'm not cynical. I believe every word of what you've told me. But you're right. Time is of the essence. I immediately went towards my filing cabinet, rushing through the invoices as quickly as I possibly could. "Oh, here it is," I said, sighing with relief. "Sapphire ring, purchased by a man called Devon Undergrove." "Leave it to me," I told the old woman. "I'll go and see Devon myself. I'll speak to him about the ring. Tell him about the acclaimed curse. I will tell him your entire story. Then it's up to him what he does about it." "You will? Oh, that is so kind of you," said the old lady. "You don't know what you've done. You've taken a weight off my mind. I'm not getting any younger these days. Coming here has taken the wind out of my sails. So knowing that you're going to take care of things, it's a monumental relief for me. I can't thank you enough." And so there I was, driving my truck to a custom-made farmhouse in the Willamette Valley, which is in the heart of wine country, approximately an hour and 20 minutes drive from my home in Portland, Oregon. I was visiting a peppermint farm of all things. I'd phoned the gentleman to tell him that I needed to see him urgently about a delicate matter concerning the sapphire ring he had purchased as a gift for his mother. I assured him that I needed to see him in person, as discussing this incongruous story over the phone was not right in my opinion, given the delicacy of the matter. Before long I found myself driving down a long asphalt driveway, surrounded by rolling verdant fields of peppermint crop, along with undulating grassland, like an ocean, rising and falling in billowing ripples. Several American quarter horses were happily frolicking in the fields, their long full tails of dark hair twitching under the pretty ethereal light of the early morning sun that was now breaking through the cobalt sky with a generous steely determination. Their dish-like heads lifted up as my truck neared its approach, their interest in me very brief. I passed a huge red barn that was so large it was suitable for a wedding venue, as well as a couple of gleaming silvery ponds, surrounded by a scattering of weeping willows that sparkled under the twinkling light, their long curvaceous arms bejewelled in emerald leaves that cascaded in long flowing voluptuous drapes above the reflectant glistening water. While propagated generously across the sprawling viridescent wilderness were ubiquitous clusters of medium-sized trees, namely Douglas firs, cottonwoods, ponderosa pines, all gathered together in tight congenial groups. In 2 shakes I found myself drawing up to a custom-made home that shimmered prettily in the first light of the new morning, casting its fragrant shadows across the wraparound porch. It was certainly an attractive house, painted in a grey-blue colour, matching the sky, complemented by a grey slate roof, while the white wooden bay windows were enormous. A young man, cleanly shaven in his early 30s with a boyish face, square jawline, along with bright hazel eyes, came ambling out of the house as quickly as he could, running towards the door of my truck, which he opened for me speedily. "Oh, there you are! I've been expecting you. Sorry, what is your name?" he said, flushing an awkward shade of pink. "I didn't get it. You are—" I stretched out my hand to shake his. Sorry, the name is Poppy Kensett." "Pleased to meet you, Poppy. I'm not going to kid. You've got me very intrigued. What was it you said? A matter of extreme importance concerning the sapphire ring I brought for my mother. Something that you reiterated must not under any circumstances be discussed over the phone. Since you called, I've been champing at the bit to get to the bottom of this enigmatic, curious mystery. I love mysteries. You're not here to tell me it was owned by Elizabeth Taylor, are you?" he teased, while the corners of his lips twitched into a smile that he was fighting to suppress. "Nothing of the sort," I said. "I'd rather not discuss it here, though. Can we go inside somewhere?" "My thoughts exactly. Have you had breakfast?" "No, I haven't, as it happens." "Good, very good. I've taken the initiative of asking the housekeeper to pack us a picnic breakfast with croissants, orange juice and a thermos of hot coffee. I hope you like croissants. I thought we could take our little picnic in the back of my ATV, where we can eat in the woods somewhere. I do enjoy eating al fresco. It makes things taste so good." "You're on," I said. "I love croissants. All that butter melting in your mouth. It doesn't get better than that, does it? I'm salivating just thinking about it already." "Good, let's go," he said in a gravelly voice. "Are you married, Miss Poppy?" "No, I'm not." "The day's getting infinitely brighter. An unexpected, serendipitous date in the woods with a very attractive woman, if I may say. I'm very fortunate indeed. Come this way." I flushed at his unexpected flattery, my skin burning a bright red, following him to his ATV vehicle. Before long we were driving through the countryside, up and down the precipitous hilly slopes, through the wooded sanctuary, where he finally parked the ATV outside a large Douglas fir tree, where we found the perfect place to picnic on the electric green forest floor. I carefully spread out the picnic blanket, flattening it out with my hands over the rambling undergrowth, while Devon opened the basket and proceeded to pull out a delectable spread that was ever so extravagant. If that wasn't enough, he opened a bottle of champagne to add some glamour to the occasion. There was smoked salmon and cream cheese bagels, warm almond croissants filled with melted butter, fresh strawberries, warm little mini cheese and bacon quiches, and strawberry shortbread slices. "Wow, this is certainly some spread. Do you do this for all your dates? Because if so, I am very impressed. Any girl turning down a date with you needs her head examining. I mean, I would date you just for a slice of this delicious strawberry shortbread." "Well, I'd like to think that it's not just the shortbread that is so beguiling. I've been told I've got nice eyes." I giggled. "You should know better. A fish does not bite at the bait if it knows it's there." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't fish for compliments. I appraise people's antiques, not the colour of their eyes. Oh, on the subject of antiques, how's your mother doing?" "That's a very strange question for you to ask. My mother may be old, but I would hardly call her an antique. You don't even know her. Why this incongruous interest in her health? If you must know, she's not doing very well." He said this, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "You know," he said, almost choking on his words, as he took a big bite of almond croissant, wiping away the crumbs from his lips. "My mother is a very remarkable woman, the life and soul of every party. She's been as fit as a fiddle all her life. We thought she'd outlive us all, but it would seem shortly after her 80th birthday her health took a dreadful nosedive. We've been told she has a rampant aggressive cancer. Only months left to live, maybe weeks or even days. You can never be sure with these things. They affect everyone so differently." "I'm sorry. You say she got sick after her 80th birthday. Did you by any chance give her the sapphire ring as a present?" "I did, as it happens. She was over the moon. She wears that ring so proudly every day of her life." "Oh dear, that's terrible." "How so?" he said, raising a quizzical brow. "Well, it's come to my attention that that ring is cursed. That's why I've come here to tell you about it." At this, Devon burst out laughing. "Cursed? I don't believe in stuff like that." "Well, it's true," I exclaimed. I proceeded to tell him the story about the old lady's trip to Africa and that strange witch doctor that had blown a purple smoke into the ring. Devon's face darkened. "It all makes sense," he said suddenly. "My mother began to get sick after she started wearing that ring. It adds up. She needs to get that ring off her finger right now, even as I speak." He pulled out his cell phone out of his pocket and began to dial her number. It's ringing, he said, champing at the bit. "Mum, please answer. Answer now. Hurry up. Get to the phone." "Hello, Devon. This is a surprise, phoning me so early in the morning," came a flat female voice, accompanied by a few desperate breaths that sounded like a woman drowning in her own lungs, as she was clearly struggling to breathe. "Mum, don't ask any questions, but do as I say. Get the sapphire ring off your finger now, the one that I gave you." "Why, son? It's so pretty. I don't want to take it off." "Because, Mum, it's cursed. The ring is slowly killing you. Take it off now. I'll explain later, but you must remove it." For a while, Devon seemed lost in his thoughts. "Thanks for coming, Poppy, but I think we should both call it a day under the circumstances. I need to get back to my mother to make sure she's taken that ring off her fingers. She can't be trusted at times." "You don't think it's too late for her?" he asked, "past the point of no return?" "I do hope not," I said. "I'm not sure what to expect with a curse, but I do know that the two women that stopped wearing the ring fully recovered. But then again, they were a lot younger than your mother. Their bodies might have been more resilient. Your mother, well, she's a lot older, isn't she? It could be a different ballgame for her." As we were pondering over these sobering thoughts, the forest suddenly seemed to shake. I was not a country girl, but I sensed immediately that something was terribly wrong. It was like the ground heaved and groaned under a mini-earthquake. "What's that?" I asked Devon, but he didn't answer. For a moment he stood there like a statue, staring blankly into the forest, almost as if transfixed by something. He then put his finger on his lips to indicate for me to remain very quiet. The rumbling sound continued. It sounded like the ground was thumping under the weight of a hefty herd of bison. "Something's coming," I squeaked. "Something's coming. Let's get out of here now." In that moment I could feel the terror passing through my veins like a steam train on full throttle, refusing to stop. Devon remained still, unresponsive to my words, while the thundering noise loomed ever closer. The ground was now crashing under a heavy footfall. Then we saw her, standing before us, towering at 8 foot tall. It was a Bigfoot, a female Bigfoot. My mouth dropped open in astonishment, my eyes growing as wide as saucers, while my whole body trembled in terror, for I knew I was standing yards away from an apex predator. I could hardly dare to believe it. I had seen the remarkable footage of the Bigfoot taken in Bluff Creek, but this creature was exceedingly different. For a start, she was lankier, leaner, more muscular, her breasts small and pert, her hair the colour of a raven's feathers, gleaming with a vibrant, robust health that carpeted her body in a luxurious coat of long flowing hair, which was less thick under the armpits and on the knee area. The thing that took me off guard, jolting my surprise out of its comfort zone in a blinding revelatory light, was the human face of the creature. Granted, it was set in a pyramid-shaped head, possessing a short neck, but with the exception of those key discrepancies, the creature was almost entirely human. Only her build was on a much larger, more impressive scale than that of ours. So yes, she was exceedingly intimidating. The creature was startled to see us, very startled. She hadn't expected to be caught out like this, but I visibly relaxed when I saw her eyes. They were kind, warm, congenial. So I knew she meant us no harm, despite her intimidating facade. I could see that she was a gentle creature. Devon was trembling, but not with fear, with wondrous excitement and awe. He pointed towards our picnic basket. "Over there," he said to the creature. "Help yourself." The creature seemed to understand his generous overtures. Needing little encouragement, she glided over to the picnic basket, lifting out the champagne bottle, taking a large swig in her mouth, swallowing a glug of the fizzy alcohol, shaking her head in disgust, as if to say, "Boy, that's revolting." But just to make absolutely sure her first impressions were accurate, she then took another swig, shaking her head again in disgust. At that, Devon and I burst out laughing. The creature sensed she had an amused audience. I think she liked it. She decided she enjoyed the attention, and receiving all this attention wasn't so bad after all. and she was possibly a teensy-weensy bit enjoying the whole thing. So she finally took a swig of the champagne again, but this time put on an exaggerated expression about her level of disgust in regards to the fizzy liquid, which had us both roaring with laughter. I discerned a very pleased twinkle in her eye. We continued to watch her as she ruffled through the picnic basket with an enthusiastic fervour. No prizes for guessing what she pulled out of the basket first. The strawberry shortbread. Of course, what else would it be? We watched as she took a bite. The orgasmic expression of ecstasy on her face was so heightened it would have made a sailor blush. The creature knew how to savour every single mouthful, eating it slowly, deliberately, chewing it thoroughly, wallowing in the crisp texture and rich sweetness. We watched her for easily over 20 minutes, devouring all that delicious strawberry shortbread until there was absolutely nothing left behind but a few crumbs. She appeared unfazed, undaunted, and unoffended by our presence. Once she'd finished the shortbread, she nodded briefly at us, lifted the basket and the champagne bottle as well, which really was rather strange given she couldn't stand the taste of it, and then she disappeared into the woods. She moved away from us, almost floating as she did. "What's wrong?" I said, looking at Devon's hazel eyes, misting over with clouds of tears. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" said Devon. "I've lived in the Wilmite Valley all my life, and then after meeting you today, I asked the universe for a prominent sign that my mother would make a swift recovery. And we so happened to chance upon the most easy, chilled, laid-back Bigfoot. I mean, what's the chance of that happening? My mother is now going to make a full recovery. I just know it. The Bigfoot is a clear sign to me." And she did. Days after removing the ring from her finger, her skin took on a purple hue. Then it all faded. Her energy returned. The cancer vanished. Sometimes life can be serendipitous, for if it had not been for that cursed ring, I would never have met my future husband, as Devon and I are now very happily married. The chances of us ever crossing paths were incredibly remote. So there definitely is an intrinsic plan behind everything. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my mother was behaving strangely. I certainly perceived this, as I knew her better than anybody else in the entire world, with of course the exception of my father. When someone you love is acting in a peculiarly odd way, it seizes and demands your attention, like the blazing bright red graffiti on a wall. I was her only daughter among a family of 4 male siblings. If that wasn't ironic enough, it would seem that every pet we ever owned was also invariably male. How that happened I could never fully fathom. So it was with many interests in common, me and my mother gravitated towards each other, more as friends than mother and daughter. It was the summer of 1966, the illustrious Chinese year of the fire horse, a year so indelibly seared in my mind, it'll never ever be forgotten. I was about 19 years old at the time. It was raining cats and dogs outside, for days on end. It seemed that there was no end in sight to the tireless, incessant, unrelenting showers that spilled tons of water over Washington state, rather like a truck driver delivering a ton of compost. It was not that different. "The earth is crying," my mother would say, when the clouds burst open to unleash their heavy volume on the earth. "But then again," she sighed, "there's a lot for her to be crying about, is there not?" I let the comment slip away, rather like a buzzing insect on a window pane, but I did not know what on earth she meant by such an off-the-cuff remark, which I wilfully chose to ignore. We watched the water splashing on the glass panes of the outside window, as long trails of opaque tears drizzled down the glass. Our home at the time was not far from Spokane in Washington, a simple rustic affair, or symmetrical home if you like, that had been built by my father's father. It was lovingly built from timber beams, resembling your quintessential wooden cabin, lacking the lavish stylized interventions of the more grandiose homes of the day. Yet it was simple, homespun if you like, but it was cosy, warm, like a nest, the one place in the world we felt the most comfortable, relaxed, and at ease. Yet despite everything, my mother had masterfully succeeded with a magical touch of savoir-faire into transforming the interior of our home into an inviting, welcoming, congenial space, or tranquil oasis if you like, by using a mishmash of unique furnishings that she picked up for next to nothing from second-hand thrift stores. Surprisingly enough, they rarely worked, adding a touch of quirky charm, reflecting our understanding of the modern-day shabby chic look, which epitomised the look of our home at the time unimpeachably. If there were any positives to this deluge of rain that had hit Washington, by all accounts there were some remarkable benefits that were plain to see. The air was so fresh, crisp, pleasingly fragrant, with the after-rain smell of petrichor. Everywhere you looked, the world had become a vibrant, viridescent green. The tall, statuesque ponderosa pines that fringed our home on every single side literally glistened from the raindrops that clung to their needles like opaque jewels. This profound afterglow from the rain always felt as if the earth had been dusted by a team of highly skilled cleaners who removed the cobwebs, the bird droppings, the dusty veils of dirt that clung to the plants and trees, while any sluggish plants subdued by the long drawn-out warm summer days had promptly discarded their former unwanted wilted leaves, embracing a much more vibrant wardrobe that subsequently gleamed, blossomed, and burst into colourful blooms. Everything looked fresh, as if the dust on the landscape had been washed away, leaving the earth renewed, restored, revitalized, lush, vibrant, spectacularly beautiful. Here in Washington, the weather could be so variable that you could experience 4 seasons in a single day. But the rain that we'd been experiencing of late had no desire of taking a back seat, but was determined to be central stage for a while, that is. My mother was clenching her fists together so tightly, opening and closing them repetitively, while she paced around the cabin up and down like a cooped-up tiger in a zoo enclosure. If you had been a fly on the wall, you would have assumed the woman was feeling confined or trapped like a bird in a cage who was longingly waiting for the weather to shift. Yet I knew my mother's behaviour better than most. It was not related to the weather at all. Something else was ailing her, and whatever it was clearly a great source of displeasure for her. The fact that she was shutting me out of her little secret was more than a little unsettling for me, but I chose to say nothing about the matter. I was biting my lips in order to subdue my tongue, for it was all I could do to ask her what the heck was wrong, and why she was acting so weird. One thing about my mother was she had nerves of steel and guts on her that would have made those merciless pirates on the high seas more than a little impressed by her feisty, determined fighting spirit. For indeed, my mother was one of a kind. I think years of growing up in London during the Second World War had left an indelible mark on her life that was impossible to erase, making her a tough nut to crack. For she had lived under the assault of nightly bombing raids, spending much time hiding out in air raid shelters. It had been a time of chaos, disarray, devastation, where food and clothes shortages or rationing were commonplace as the sparrows in your front yard, that is. I remember she told me she would lie in bed at night, clenching her fists so tightly, much like she was doing right now. She would hear the rumbles and explosions of bombs going off throughout the night from a long distance away. She would wonder who had been hit. She would beg, "Please, God, make it stop." But it seemed that God was not hearing the prayers of this desperate young girl. If the bombing were too close to home, she said you could feel the earth shift the ground beneath you, heaving, groaning, wobbling, shaking, like a massive explosion on a demolition site, where you could hear whole buildings crashing to the ground like piles of Lego blocks. Ostensibly, more often or not, if the noise loomed closer, her family would rush to the air raid shelter at the bottom of the yard. It was what you had to do back in those days, she had explained to me. We were like terrified mice, continuously fleeing from the household tabby every time it ventured too close to the mouse hole. It felt like that for us, she told me. So this intrinsic fight and flight adrenaline response was indeed an inbuilt part of our lives. We were always running, hiding, as if our lives depended on it. You could wake up in a single morning to find your geographic location completely distorted, for with the bombings assaulting the city on a regular basis, what it looked like today could indeed be a very different picture the following morning, so one never knew exactly what to expect. One night the neighbour's little girl had come running over to my mother's parents' house, unbeknown to her own parents. She crept out of the house surreptitiously, with the determination of a gutsy young girl. She was crying inconsolably, as her treasured little kitten was caught up in a tree in the backyard. It appeared too afraid to come down, for it had climbed up the tree far too far and lost its nerve. She begged her parents to help her get the kitten down from its high perch in the tree. They had assured her that the kitten would do just fine on its own and would still be there in the morning, and then they would get it down for her. In the meantime, she needed to go to bed right now and get some well-needed sleep. The little girl knew from experience that it would not necessarily be fine. It seldom ever was. She knew her precious little kitten might not be there in the morning, as the bombings had made you all too well aware of the fragility of life. The little girl had been banging on the front door. My mother's father, in his blue and white striped pyjamas, darted down the sweeping staircase to see what on earth was going on. Who was rapping on the door at this ungodly hour of the night? It would appear that the little 7-year-old girl, clutching a teddy bear tightly to her chest, stood outside their door, trembling, wobbling like a jelly, her white face so desperately pale, her hazel eyes flooding with tears. She looked so lost, fragile, so vulnerable, like a helpless drowned kitten on the side of the road that desperately needed rescuing. "What's wrong, little tinker?" my mother's father asked the girl, a look of horror enveloping his face as he began to mull over in his mind what the problem could be. You see, in wartime you could easily envisage the worst-case scenario in any given moment. The girl began to blubber. Her childlike words were incomprehensible, drowned out by her tears. The girl beckoned for my grandfather to follow her. By this time, my grandmother and my mother, who was 15 at the time, joined my father at the front door. They unhesitantly followed the young girl to her backyard, with the full light of their kerosene lamps, their hearts heavy, as they feared that something quite terrible had happened to Tinker's parents. In a trice, the low drones and booming sounds could be heard over the city, along with the sounds of the shrill, ear-blasting air raid sirens going off spontaneously. Then there was such a loud, ear-piercing, shattering explosion that ripped, stabbed through the fabric of the earth with such a violent, forceful, tearing power that my mother's family, along with the little girl, went spontaneously flying across the grass in her yard like the pellets in a BB gun. My mother's parents trembled, shook, jiggled in shock, hardly daring to believe that the house that they'd been sleeping in only moments before was now lying in a heap of rubble on the ground. If they hadn't been evacuated from the house so swiftly by the distressed young girl, their lifeless, unresponsive bodies would now be buried under the house right now. My mother told me that for a very long time afterwards, no one said a single word, for such was the level of shock. Granted, you could hear the background sounds of the air raid sirens blasting through the night sky, the rumbling aftershocks of loose debris, as stones, brick, cement, scaffolding, and loose building material went rolling precariously along the ground, until it too finally stopped. Professedly the voices of screaming people, their piercing, anxious cries, dreadful screams, sent chills of dread throbbing down your spine, interrupted the night with an inauspicious heaviness. But in this moment of time, all was still, so still, in fact, that you could have cut the silence with a knife. My mother's father, or grandfather if you like, was the first to speak. "How did that even happen? There wasn't any warning. No siren going off in time to warn us. We could have been in there. We could be dead by now." In that second, my mother and her parents cradled each other in their arms, ever grateful for having their lives so graciously spared, not wanting to let go of each other. The young girl, who'd fallen on the ground from the huge quaking effects of the gigantic explosion, rose from her fallen position, stumbling awkwardly to her feet, unperturbed by the rude, fortuitous intrusion of an impetuous bomb. Her thoughts, so unselfish, centered on her beloved friend. She gestured towards a tall tree in her yard. My parents diligently followed her lead. The young girl pointed up towards the tree. "Please help him," she cried earnestly. "Please, please help him." My grandparents glanced up at the tree, and there on the branch was the most petrified kitten that they'd ever seen. It was trembling so much, its green eyes round with terror, its grey silken hair puffed up to twice its size. My grandfather unhesitantly climbed up the tree to retrieve the poor kitten for the young girl. She grabbed it in her tiny hands, rubbing her soft cheeks into its soft textured fur. Then she began to sob. "Thank you, mister. Thank you so much for what you've just done for me." "Thank you," said my grandfather. "Thank you, little tinker. You did a fine job tonight, a splendid job. You didn't just rescue your little kitten there, you rescued us all as well." My mother's parents looked at each other in shock, as it hit them that this kitten had saved their lives, along with the desperate concern of a little girl for its welfare. At that they burst out laughing, for in wartime even the most inappropriate things had their humour. The girl's parents were frantically looking for little Tinker, crying out her name in desperation, obliviously unaware of their daughter's heroism. Those stories, and many like them, were commonplace during the Second World War, where strange and ominous events might surreptitiously lead people away from a building moments before a bomb was to hit their home. It was experiences like this for my mother, including the days of living on bread and milk, or hours spent restlessly queuing outside the butcher's in the vain hope that there might just be a piece of beef for dinner that night. All these tumultuous challenges had chiselled, shaped, moulded my mother, like a great work of modern sculpture, into a woman of steely strength and grit, the woman that she had become. For believe me, she could be as tough as old boots, should the need ever arise. My mother possessed a lean, trim figure, a long, buoyant head of curly dark curls, and was so easy on the eye. She was terribly pretty. She had married my father after a chance meeting in King's Cross, when a gust of wind had blown my mother's hat down the street, whereby my gallant father had eagerly run after it to retrieve it for her. My mother had been mesmerised by the allure of this handsome American stranger, with his irresistible, charming southern drawl. She was not about to let him go in a hurry, nor slip through her fingers like melted butter, so the retrieval of a hat was the perfect excuse to get better acquainted with him. The rest is history, after which my parents married and moved to Washington. So now you perhaps understand, with my mother's background history, that this courageous woman was not easily upset about anything, as growing up in the war had given her a tough inner hide. It would appear that on this occasion something was clearly troubling her, as her eyes kept darting towards our gravel driveway, as if expecting a strange visitor. My father and 4 brothers had gone fishing at the lake, so we were all alone, and as far as I knew it, we weren't expecting anyone. All of a sudden we could hear heavy rubber wheels grinding wet gravel as the rain continued to fall. A white truck rolled up our driveway until it screeched to a final stop, while the engine switched off. The sound of the truck door being opened and slammed could be heard, along with the crunch of heavy feet, as they finally approached our front door. "Thank goodness he's here," sighed my mother with relief, rushing over to the door to welcome in the tall stranger. The man almost shook himself like a wet dog, as my mother helped him remove his raincoat, guiding him into our warm kitchen, where she busied herself preparing the stranger tea. My mother's idea that tea was a solution to every problem was of course deeply entrenched in her English roots. "I'm so glad you came," she said, clanging the cutlery together, and promptly placing a warm cup of tea in front of the man, who took it gratefully, glugging down a couple of big gulps. I would say he was in his 40s, with a receding hairline with dark brown eyes that rather reminded me of a raven, very perceptive, quick and discerning, which I was to learn later complemented his line of profession. "This is my daughter Hazel, Mr. Potter. What you tell me, you can tell her as well." "Are you sure that's wise, Mrs. Levy? Will not the delicate nature of our discussion cause her undue stress?" "Good gracious, no, Mr. Potter. I'd like to think of my daughter being made of sterner stuff than that. Otherwise she'll be about as much use as a broken folding chair on a camping trip." "What's going on, Mum? Who are you, Mr. Potter, if you don't mind me asking?" "Mr. Potter is a private investigator," said my mother. "He's been investigating your father's coming and goings of late on my behalf." "You're spying on Dad?" I asked, looking at my mother with an aghast expression on my face. "How could you do that to him, Mum? That's disgusting. You wouldn't like it if Dad kept spying on you." "Get a grip, Hazel," piped my mother. "I hired Mr. Potter here to find out if your father has been having an affair." "Mother, that's insanely ridiculous. Dad loves the bones of you. He'd never ever cheat on you in 100 years. "That's not what one of the ladies in the book club seems to think. She swore blind she saw your father hand in hand with a blonde leaving the Jefferson Hotel in Washington together." I gasped. There must be some mistake. Dad would never do that to you. Mr. Potter cleared his throat uncomfortably, pulling out a brown envelope from the bag that he'd been carrying. I think you need to see these, he said, to give you the answers you are looking for. My mother grabbed the photographs unhesitantly, staring at them for a moment as she rifled through one photograph after another, as if reviewing a collection of still clips from a holiday abroad. I knew it! I knew it! Your father's cheating on me, with the likes of Tasha Simpson. Oh, it doesn't get more obscene than that. If that isn't offensive enough, he's cheating on me. But I would credit him as having a little bit more taste than Tasha Simpson. I mean, that girl is the town floozy. You couldn't get lower than that if you tried. You couldn't even sink lower. You know this young lady? Asked the private investigator, lifting his brow in an expression of surprise. Know her? Of course I know her, Mr. Potter. There isn't a man in Washington state that doesn't. Nor is there a man that is safe with that woman around. She's wrecked more marriages than you and I have had hot dinners. She had an affair with Pastor Doug Fielding last year. The poor, poor man, he's now living in a trailer park somewhere, his life hanging in limbo, in tatters around him. Even his devout flock have abandoned him, rather like a noxious bad smell. It's a terribly sad story. Not a good woman, then, said the investigator, stroking his moustache reflectively. Even I could see that from miles away. But men can be so easily fooled and seduced by a charming, beguiling smile and a naive, innocent look. She has the whole act down to a masterful fine art. Looks like a predator to me, lurking in the shadows, eager to take down her unsuspecting quarry. A huntress of men, shall we say, and a very good one at that, too. It would seem her victims ever fail to see from beyond the sweet, curvaceous veneer. For beneath what lies a narcissistic snake. I'm very fortunate that my insight through years of sleuthing has made me a remarkably good judge of character. Well, it sounds like you are correct about that. You're describing her superbly, Mr. Potter. I couldn't have put it better myself. I grabbed the photograph from my mother's hands, my heart plunging like a rock, sinking to the depths of a very large lake. This was my father, the man I respected, revered, esteemed, in such high regard, the man in my own eyes who could do no wrong. But in a matter of seconds, my opinion of him was washed away like the water being drained from a sink. I studied the pictures over and over again. The compromising positions, the long kisses, the pathetic, adoring puppy dog looks. It made my skin want to crawl. Waves of nausea rose up in the back of my throat in disgusted revulsion. I wanted to get into the photograph myself, to shake my father so hard, to tell him to wake up, to smell the coffee. What the heck was wrong with him? There was no doubt in my mind that my father had completely lost leave of his senses, along with my respect. I felt as if I'd been hit in the head by a forklift truck. I can't believe it. I can't believe it, I said, sounding as if I'd run the Boston Marathon. I was so out of breath. How could he do this to you, Mum? If Nathan, Robert, Carl, Leith knew about this, they would kill him. Leave your brothers out of this, Hazel dear. There's no need to overreact. If you must know, I blame the little treacherous snake for all our current troubles. That woman delights in her hot pursuit of married men. She has it down to a fine art, she does. It's like she's hooked on ruining people's marriages. Gets a rush over it, like some people get a high on drugs. I must admit, I never put your father down as a man of such weak resolve, who would fall for her bait like an unsuspecting fish to a fisherman's line. But then again, maybe I underestimate Tasha Simpson's poignant powers of persuasion. The private investigator cleared his throat. I trust I've given you the information you need, Miss Levy. I'm sorry that my investigations had to uncover such disagreeable, unpleasant truths. But as I've always said to my clients, it is best to know what's going on behind your back than to be left cluelessly in the dark. Now, is there anything else you might need? There is, as it happens. Do you happen to know if Tasha has any fixed daily routines by any chance? Well, she has coffee at 9 at the Sizzling Grill every morning, if that helps. Oh, and she takes her Yorkshire Terrier on the Blue Ridge Trail every afternoon. At about 5, I think. Why are you asking, Miss Levy? He paused for a moment and said, I know you're angry, Miss Levy, and rightly so. I would be in your shoes as well. And I know it's none of my business, so please forgive me for butting in. But I would advise you to be very careful, if I were you. That Tasha Simpson, she's not a good woman. She can't be trusted. You must be very careful. I was amazed to see how stoic my mother was after the investigators' blinding revelations, which would have made most women crumble, fall apart, rush to the divorce courts as fast as they possibly could. But not my mother. Instead, my mother was composed, reflective, thoughtful, mellow even, as if nothing fazed her in the slightest. "Are you going to divorce Dad?" I asked my mother. "I would if I were wearing your shoes. I'd never let a man treat me like that. What Dad has done to you is despicable. I can't get my head around it. I'm in shock. I feel as if the rug has been pulled from beneath our feet." "You think I'm going to divorce your father over this slight mishap?" said my mother, looking at me appalled. "I have had to fight for everything in my life, Hazel. The war didn't make it easy for any of us. I'm not about to throw away the best thing that has ever happened to me in my life just because of your father's quick tumble in the hay with Tasha Simpson. I'd like to think I'm made of sterner stuff than that." "Mum, it's more than a tumble in the hay. Did you not see the pictures? Did you not see the way they were looking at each other in the photographs?" "I did see those pictures, Hazel. But I saw a different picture altogether. I saw a man completely seduced by a woman who has lured him in her duplicitous net like a lamb to the slaughter. Your father, Hazel, he's obliviously unaware of how hoodwinked he is. Tasha is like a female praying mantis eating her man alive, while he's none the wiser as to what is going on, until it's all too late, of course." "You're saying Dad's weak? That's a first." "Well, that may be a fitting description as far as Tasha Simpson is concerned. But I want you to promise me one thing, Hazel dear, that you're not going to breathe a word about this to your father, nor to your brothers. They don't need to know about any of this. Promise?" "But why?" I protested. "Don't you think you should confront Dad with what he's done?" "Sometimes, Hazel dear, it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. Not to ruffle any feathers. But as far as Tasha Simpson is concerned, the boa constrictor, shall we say, I'm on to her. I'm going to get her off your father so he can finally breathe again. And I'm going to also take those rose-coloured blinders off his eyes." My mother's plan rolled into action on a Tuesday afternoon. The rain in Washington had finally subsided, but the fruits of the generous deluge were clear to see, for everything in Washington was thriving, blossoming, propagating, while the world was swathed in carpets of rich green, wherever you looked. We were in the truck waiting for Tasha to arrive at the Blue Ridge Trail to walk her Yorkshire Terrier, while our French bulldog Dozer seemed to think all his Christmases had come at once. For visiting a new walking destination for him was not without its appeal. He was bounding up and down the seats, looking out of every window, wagging his tail profusely, making slow woofing sounds at the back of his throat to express his rapturous enthusiasm. We could see the occasional dog walker returning to the truck after their walk, then driving away, while we remained still in our truck, waiting, hoping that Tasha would finally show up. When she did, all the other dog walkers had long since left and gone home. We were the only truck remaining in the parking bay. On hearing Tasha's truck gliding into the lot, we automatically ducked for cover under the seats so as not to be seen or observed by her. We could hear the young woman open the side door of her car, slamming it behind her as she trailed into the woods, a secluded, resplendent sanctuary composed of ponderosa pines and Douglas firs, along with open hiking trails, verdant ground covers from ferns, mosses, fungi, pretty flowering shrubs. I could only see the silhouette of the woman's straight back. She was wearing bright pink leggings, pink leg warmers and a fluffy pink top, while her blonde curly hair sported a pink headband. Even her adorable little dog was wearing a bright pink collar, running happily beside her, sniffing the ground intently, as if picking up a kaleidoscope of exciting scents. "There's our little boa constrictor," said my mother. "We'll keep a distance behind her in the woods. Then I'm going to pounce on her in surprise, deliver a few home truths that she needs to hear. I want to ensure she leaves this place with her tail between her legs, and, of course, my husband alone." "Are you sure you know what you're doing, Mum?" I asked, as we both followed the unsuspecting young woman into the woods. Finally, we caught up with her. She turned around, looking directly at my mother with eyes blazing like daggers. Make no mistake about it, she knew exactly who my mother was, and did not even dignify her with a slight blush in regards to her guileful indiscretions. Instead, she looked as innocent as a china doll, as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. "What are you doing, creeping on me like that?" she snapped, looking at us belligerently. "How dare you pounce on me and my dog with such stealth? I thought you were a mountain lion." "Oh, believe me, Tasha Simpson, I wish I was a mountain lion, because I would tear you apart, limb from limb. Where do you get off trying to steal other people's husbands?" "Steal," giggled Tasha. "So you know about my affair with your pathetic husband, do you?" she said, her eyes twinkling as though revelling in my mother's indignation. "So you think I had to steal your husband from you, is that it? Believe me, girl, there was no stealing involved. Your husband was practically begging for my affections. It would seem he can't get enough of me. But then who could blame him? I mean, look at me. Look at you. It's like comparing creme caramel with a stodgy rice pudding. No contest at all. Can't get enough of a cheap tart like you. What are you smoking, girl? Look at yourself. You're a cheap floozy. Anyone can see that at a glance. You look cheap, you speak cheap, you act cheap. Look at the tsunami of broken marriages trailing behind you. The lives you've so callously ruined. The hearts you've so willfully broken. Why, I don't believe there's a shred of human decency in your boa constrictor soul. You love squeezing the life out of everyone you meet, and enjoying it in the process. You're seriously sick. You're unhinged, woman." Tasha made a hissing sound like a snake. "Tsa, tsa, tsa. So I'm sucking the life out of your husband, am I? I confess I'm enjoying every minute of it too. Once I've drained him completely dry, I'll hand you over the leftover carcass, shall I?" "You're a snake," said my mother, lunging towards the woman, grabbing a piece of her blonde hair which she tugged very hard. The woman screamed, "Ah!" her face growing crimson with rage, her body rattling like a snake in her indignation. Her eyes seemed to hiss with fury. Before I knew it, both women were kicking, screaming, hitting, fighting each other, creating such a commotion that the forest floor began to visibly shake. There were legs flying in the air like loose cricket bats, arms oscillating wildly like octopus tentacles, and angry shrieks and screams piercing the ear like firecrackers taking off in the sky all at once. "Ma'am," I cried, "stop this, please, stop, before someone gets seriously hurt." But it seemed that my words had fallen on deaf ears as the screams, protests and wails persisted. Tasha's Yorkshire Terrier and our French Bulldog were trailing around the undergrowth very happily, lifting legs, sniffing leaves, obliviously unaware of the upheaval in their midst, or if they even had an inkling about it, they sensibly turned a blind eye. I could hear a thundering sound moving through the woods, getting ever closer. If you hadn't known any better, you might have suspected it was the rumble of an underground earthquake somewhere. But this booming momentum was deliberate as it ventured and moved ever closer. Then standing yards away from the two fighting women was a female Bigfoot. At the time I didn't know what she was, but I knew she was the most intimidating, intriguing creature that I'd ever beheld in my entire life. I was gobsmacked. I think the thing that struck me the most was how remarkably human she appeared to be, with of course the exception of her overlong arms, distinctive pyramid-shaped head, and of course the fact that she was easily over 700 pounds, so very substantial in weight. She was covered in long flowing hazelnut hair, with a distinctive auburn hue. Her full breasts were low slung on a remarkably muscular chest, where the ropey ripples of muscular definition came busting through the skin, like the gnarled, knotty roots of a tree rising above the earthen floor. I noticed in the depths of her deep-set, treacle-coloured eyes there appeared to be a befuddled expression on her face as she witnessed this bizarre, incongruous scene unfolding before her, as the two angry women wrestled each other in a heated rage. She scratched her head as if grappling with how to respond to this outlandish situation, or whether to respond to it at all. She seemed hesitant, reluctant, uncertain, but her jawline twitched nervously. Then, as if she had had just about as much as she could take, she screamed, her jaw opening wide to unleash a bellowing cry. In that second the incessant fighting stopped, as the two startled women looked up to see this monstrous creature screaming at the top of her lungs. while the reverberating sounds of the high-pitched screams caused the forest to violently shake. My mother and Tasha ran through the forest as fast as they possibly could, hardly daring to draw breath, while my mother was shouting for me and Dozer. "Hazel! Dozer! Get back to the truck now! Hazel! Dozer!" I stood there still, frozen like a statue, but not with fear, with total wondrous awe. The creature's eyes locked into mine. I could see a glint of amusement in their depths, as if she too was surprised by the efficiency of her own scream, for it had certainly broken up the fight. We shared a meaningful moment together, at the understanding of what had just transpired. This extraordinary intelligent female Bigfoot had scared two women witless out of their fight. I knew that she had been the peacemaker, although on the surface she appeared anything but I knew differently. "Clever girl," I whispered to myself, "clever girl." The creature's eyes smiled at me, as if she knew exactly what I was saying. I watched in wondrous awe and admiration, as on two powerful legs she glided away so gracefully, seemingly pleased that the peace had once again been restored to the forest. I searched for the two dogs. I found them cowering in terror under a briar bush. They had sensed the presence of this powerful beast, and were less than amused. I managed to persuade them to come out of their hiding place. I imagine the Bigfoot's terrifying screams had clearly unsettled them. I walked out of the forest with the two dogs beside me. Tasha's truck had already left the area. I can't say I was surprised. She had even abandoned her own dog in her haste to leave. As was expected, my brave mother was seated in her truck, contemplating what to do next, as she knew I was in the forest with that thing around, along with two very frightened dogs. My mother looked startled to see me approach her truck so casually, without any haste, accompanied by an air of indifference, as if this had been no different to any other walk in the park. "Thank God you're all right! Did you see it? Did you see it?" I nodded. "I saw it." "Did you hear it?" I nodded. "What the heck? What was it?" "I'd be damned if I know," I said. It seemed very human. "Is that all you can say, Hazel? What the heck is wrong with you, dear? There was a monster in the woods, and you're behaving as if you saw the neighbour's tabby. How can you sit there looking so unfazed? That thing, it was a monster if I ever saw one, and a scary one at that. I've been sitting here doing my nut, wondering what I should do, because you could have been killed by that thing. I was hoping you'd be savvy enough to sneak back to the truck with Dozer and Tasha's Yorkie. But the way you're acting, Hazel, it's very unsettling for me. You're acting like it was no big deal, like it was nothing. That creature could have killed us. Did you see the size of the thing? It wouldn't have killed us, Mother. Not any of us. The creature screamed to break your fight. It was seriously getting out of hand with the two of you, fighting like wild dogs. I imagine half your hair is scattered across the forest floor by now. I think it was more concerned that you and Tasha might actually harm each other. I think she was actually looking out for the both of you." "Are you crazy, Hazel?" piped my mother. "Did you not see how it screamed at us? That was not a creature looking after our best interests. It was a creature that wanted to tear us apart, limb from limb." "I think you'll find, Mother, that you and Tasha were doing a pretty good job at that." When I returned home to the cabin with Tasha's dog in tow, I phoned her up. "Hello," came a quiet, subdued voice at the other end of the telephone. "Hi, Tasha. I've got your dog from the woods." "Oh, you've got Felix!" she cried out in delight. "You've got my baby! Is he all right?" "He's absolutely fine. I've got your Felix." The creature, it didn't kill him?" "No, Felix is absolutely fine. But you're not going to be getting him back any time soon, until you tell my father that you don't want to ever see him again. You need to end that relationship now, this very second, or you'll never see Felix again, because I will be keeping him." "Oh, I'll do that," she said with an air of indifference. "I'll break up with him now. But I want my dog pronto, understand?" It confirmed my worst fears. Tasha had never cared a bean for my father. That all happened a long time ago. Since then my mother and father have long since been deceased, while I myself am now embracing the winter years of my life. For the one thing I've learnt, life is very short, far too short. My mother was a brave wartime girl, who hung on to the things she loved with a steely grit and determination. refusing to let go of what mattered to her in life, and fighting for it if needs must. She graciously spared my father the huge indignity and humiliation of confronting him about his affair. But I'm in no doubt that despite his foolish indiscretions, my mother was quite literally the love of his life. As for Bigfoot, she used her savvy emotional intelligence to scare two women away from their fight. And for her emotional intelligence, I do admire her greatly. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I am from Beaver Creek in Oregon that overlooks the serene, magnificent views over Mount Hood. I'm writing to tell you about my Bigfoot encounter that happened in the fall of 2015. I am 70 years old now, and I'm a retired police officer. My wife Hazel and I live in an enchanting, idyllic, country post and beam log-style home on 40 acres of private, pristine land, with glorious, lush green rolling hills, stunning valleys, silvery lakes, enchanting ponds, and let's not forget the ubiquitous trees, both large and small, young and old, dotted around everywhere. As I was retired from the New York police force, I made sure that I made my life as complete and as full as possible, because having seen many officers in my position retire and settle down to a slower pace of life, invariably they no longer felt challenged, and often as a result they would pass away. So I decided I would retire but keep my life challenged and stimulated as much as I possibly could. So I did keep in touch with my friends on the force. I would offer them my wealth of wisdom and years of experience when they needed another perspective on the case. That not only helped them solve cases better, but it invariably gave me a new lease of life and gave me that rush of adrenaline and that buzz that I always had working in the police force. It takes a special type of person to become an officer if you are passionate about solving crimes. It was always in my blood to uncover the body language of a potential suspect, relying a lot on gut instinct and often reenacting a case. Another way I keep myself stimulated is engaging on hunts with some of the locals in this part of the world who have been teaching me how to refine my skills as a hunter and how to navigate the forests looking for potential great hunting locations. To be a good hunter, you need to incorporate a lot of detective work and skills to figure out where the deer may congregate, and furthermore, you need to learn how to camouflage yourself well enough to ensure that you are not detected by an animal. Because believe me, if you are seen or smelt at all, the game is up and you will almost certainly not return home with a trophy deer or anything at all. One day I was having a beer with my hunting colleagues called Russell. He was telling me about his niece, who I will call Adele for the purposes of this story. One day she went jogging and claims to have been attacked by a mountain lion. I'm afraid I cannot reveal the exact geographical location for reasons of confidentiality in this case. He said that the animal had pounced on her and dragged her into a grassy verge and left her there without even attempting to kill her. The ravine was on a sheer mountainous ridge which was not easy to climb, and it just seemed so implausible that a mountain lion would behave like that. These creatures do not hang around when it comes to killing their prey. Even weirder still, on a medical examination, Adele had absolutely no bruises, drag marks, or even scratches on her body, apart from a handprint. But there was something strange, and it was the black bruise marks of 4 large fingers on top of her arm. A mountain lion does not bruise a person with 4 long finger marks, he reflected. Despite what Adele is saying, there is no way a mountain lion did this to her. So why in the world is she lying to me and to us? Is she trying to protect her abductor? He continued to share with me how traumatized his niece was over the experience. It seemed even days after the event, she was so terrified that she had been unable to speak, and even mentioning the attack made her burst into floods of uncontrollable tears. How was she found, I asked. A dog walker in the lower valley found one of Adele's pink sneakers, and recognized it immediately because Adele runs every day and she always wears pink and often encounters all these other dog walkers, so they know her well. The sneaker lay in some grass at the bottom of the ridge. The police were called and organized a search party, and that was when she was found. Even when they rescued her, she barely said a word. I wondered if you could look at the case and talk to Adele, because something's not right here, and I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to know what happened to my poor little niece. Well, I said, before I do anything, I'd like to speak to Adele and go and search the area she was found on the sheer mountainous ridge. I would also like to see if I can find any evidence of that mountain lion activity in the location and where she claims to have been attacked. I could suddenly feel that exciting adrenaline surge I usually got as a police officer pulsing through my body, energizing me with a huge drive to get to the bottom of this case, because I knew I needed answers. I knew something about this girl's story was not adding up. My first port of call was a visit with Adele, who I was told was emotionally unfit to speak to anyone at this stage, but I assured the girl's mother that I only needed a few words. My daughter has not eaten a thing in 3 days, officer, she told me. I have never seen my daughter this withdrawn and this disorientated before. Adele was sitting on her bed, clutching a teddy bear tightly to her chest, almost as if the stuffed animal was giving her some measure of comfort that I thought seemed immature for a girl of 18 years old. Hello, I said, introducing myself. I just want to find out more about your mountain lion attack. You see, the physical evidence from the medical examiner does not line up with your story. You have 4 bruise marks on your hands that appear to be made from a man. Is there someone you are trying to protect? I asked. I'm not protecting anyone, Adele snapped. Why won't anyone believe me about the mountain lion? Because the dots do not add up, I said, and I know that you are not telling the truth. You are covering up for someone, and I want to know why. Who are you protecting? Please go, said the girl. I do not appreciate being hounded like this. If you do not believe me, I do not care. I'm sticking to my story. I was puzzled. Why was this intelligent girl being so evasive, and what on earth was she hiding? I was almost certain that a family member had abducted her, and she refused to blow their cover. This was not the first time I had seen a victim protecting their abductor before. It was quite common. It was all exceedingly odd, the way she was behaving, I thought. I knew the girl was lying for sure, but I also knew that I needed answers. So I drove to the location of the abduction, and what I saw there left me with more questions than answers. The area was strewn with broken tree limbs that had been snapped, and the ground was covered with Adele's sneaker marks, and these huge footprints that were more akin to a bear's than a mountain lion's were everywhere. One thing I did know was that a human could not have such monstrously huge feet, so surely they had to be that of a bear. Looking at the scuff marks in the soil, it definitely looked as if Adele had put up some fight against her abductor, but she had clearly lost that battle. I searched around for telltale marks of a mountain lion, and there were no signs of any such predator. There were no coyote or puma, panther or mountain lion tracks anywhere, which affirmed to me what I knew, that Adele was definitely not abducted by a mountain lion. I decided to investigate the ridge where Adele was found, and believe me, it was sheer, steep and treacherous, and climbing up this thing was so hazardous. I can't even begin to tell you how hazardous it was. I'm a fit man, but climbing that ridge was arduous, and it must have taken agility, strength, perfect balance and coordination to make it up that ridge with Adele. On my approach, I had nearly slipped 6 times, and it would not have taken me much to shatter my ankle. I truly did not know what to think other than the fact that Adele's abductor was in pristine physical condition with extraordinary agility, which would rule out a lot of potential males as suspects. Whoever abducted Adele was in remarkable shape. Suddenly I came across the grassy verge where Adele had been found, and it was covered with bracken, twigs, fern and branches of pine. It really looked like some kind of a predator's nest. I was growing increasingly confused. Who or what had abducted Adele, I wonder? I decided to investigate the wooded area where Adele runs, and something stood out to me. There were strange markers all around the forest, where bark had almost been cleaned off the tree trunks to reveal the smooth, clean wooden surface beneath. And these areas went up to 8 feet in height. It was like an animal that was extremely tall had been rubbing his body against the tree and shedding away the outer bark so that he could have a good big scratch. Suddenly, as I looked around the woods, I just knew instinctively I was not alone. Something was watching me, and whatever it was exceedingly dangerous. I just knew it. Having worked in the force for many years, I had learnt to rely on my gut instincts, and believe me, my life had been saved multiple times by trusting them. I immediately raised my rifle and peered through the scope, but believe me, there was nothing there. But I felt cold, heartless eyes on me, like that of a savage predator, but I saw absolutely nothing. I stood still like a statue, listening for a moment, and noticed how unusually quiet everything was. So much so, in fact, that it gave a very airy and sinister feeling to the whole area. What in God's name was Adele thinking, I thought, running in an area that felt this menacing? Suddenly I heard this low-pitched guttural growl, and it was directed at me. Ah! I cannot describe that noise because it went right through my whole body, and it had the similar incapacitating effects of a taser, and I kid you not. It was that disorientating and that shocking. I have always been known for remaining calm in a dangerous shootout, but my calmness fled and was replaced with a feeling of impending dread and doom. It was then that I saw it stepping out of its cloak of invisibility into our reality, a creature the likes of what I have never seen before. What on earth was this hideous form that was growling at me? I had never seen anything like it before. Ah! The creature was a 10-foot monster, and he was monstrously huge. Truly, there are no words to describe this bipedal being that looked as if it had stepped out of my darkness nightmare and taken form. The creature was truly no less than 1,000 pounds and maybe more. Bear in mind, I'm a retired officer, so I'm not given to exaggeration. All over his body he was covered in hair, although it was more scant on the groin area, which meant I could see this creature was all male. Also the face was hairless, the skin grey and thick with deep furrows on the protruding forehead, but it was those furious brown eyes that concerned me the most. They were terrifying, with a predatory look on them that did not spare any punches, as the creature wanted me dead. And there was no time like the present for him to engage in his brutal intentions. For a second, which seemed to last for hours, because it was the longest second of my entire life, I could feel my blood growing cold, and this dull, foreboding ache spread over my entire body as I came to the sudden realization that my life was indeed ebbing away, even before he pulled any punches on me. My hands were sweating so profusely that I could not keep the rifle straight in my hands anymore, and using it on this creature was completely pointless, because I knew this thing was way faster than my hand would be on the trigger. I would be dead before I even attempted to shoot him, and I knew it, that even if I tried in my situation, it would be hopeless for me, and it would be more hopeless than it already was. The creature lunged towards me like a boxer taking a punch, and I knew he wanted to fight me and wanted me to fight him back. I tried to use the back of my rifle like a thrashing arm, but I just landed up thrashing the air because the creature moved away so fast. Suddenly he lashed out at my hand, and I could hear the bone in my wrist shatter, and the pain was so debilitating I screamed out in agonizing pain. Then as I lay, I rolled up in a ball on the ground, crying out in the pain that I was feeling. The creature kicked me with one of his legs, and I could hear my knee shatter and sharp shooting pains rocket through my body like firecrackers. Suddenly I heard the barking of distant dogs as they suddenly ran into the brush towards me with their owner who was walking behind them. I let out a terrified scream, and the dog walker fired some shots in the air. In seconds the creature had vanished, leaving me as a bundle of throbbing pain on the wooded clearing. That dog walker saved my life, even though I gathered later that they did not even get a glimpse of my attacker, but they had sensed something was horribly wrong, which was why they let out the warning shots with their rifle. I was in pain for a very long time and needed knee surgeries and titanium plates in my wrists, so I was out of action for a few long weeks. In that time I did some research and realized that I had been savagely wrestled by a Bigfoot, or a hairy man, or Sasquatch, and suddenly all the pieces of Adele's mysterious abduction started to make sense to me. No wonder Adele was not talking, and neither was I. We were hardly about to tell the world that a Bigfoot had very nearly killed me, and he had not enjoyed toying me first before unleashing his final fatal blow. I would almost certainly be dead by now. I was certain of that. When I was completely recovered from my injuries, I went to meet up with Adele at a coffee shop. She ordered a chocolate milkshake, and I had a cafe latte with a blueberry muffin. "What is all this?" asked Adele. "Why did you need to see me?" she asked. "Because," I said, "I know it was a Bigfoot that abducted you that day." Adele almost choked on her milkshake and went a deathly white, and then she began to sob and sob and sob. "Are you all right, ma'am?" asked the waitress curiously. "This gentleman here, he's not upsetting you, is he?" she said, pointing at me with an accusatory look. "No, it's not him," she said. "I'm just over-emotional." It was then that Adele told me what really happened the day that she went for her morning jog. I was running in the woods when something ran through the undergrowth at me like a heavy bulldozer, and before I knew it, I was fighting off this hairy ape-man-like creature. He gripped me powerfully with one of his hands and balanced me on his shoulders, carrying me up that sheer ridge. He was like a trapeze artist because his balance was impeccable. I was terrified because I thought I would fall to my death, but he held me down fast with his strong hands. When he got me on the grassy verge, he started stroking my hair and face as if I was precious to him, almost as if he was seeing me as a potential mate or wife. He even brought me berries and dead birds to eat. I think he thought the ridge would be a perfect hiding place for me. "Wow," I said, "that truly is some story." "Oh, it is," agreed Adele, "and not one I'm willing to tell to just anyone. Can you imagine the ridicule we would get if we vented our stories out there? No one would ever believe us. They do not believe me about the mountain lion account anyway," she laughed. "But so what do I care?" I agreed. The less said about the matter, the better. Adele and I have healed physically, but the emotional ramifications of that attack have left their indelible mark on me, and I know I will never be quite the same again as I was before this tortuous encounter. I hope your listeners enjoyed my story. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.